Chapter 12:14. It would have been fine if Nefarian had only been sent flying, but Duque had taken advantage of the moment when the sword bounced back to slash at Nefarian's chin. If it weren't for the fact that Nefo was rather agile and managed to dodge the sword's momentum by leaning back, Nefarian's head would probably have been split in half. At this moment, disbelief was written all over everyone's face. Magni covered his wound, and his eyes were as wide as bells. Grom turned around and grinned widely. Gavin Rad, who had rushed over, slashed with his sword, but Nefarian dodged it with a quick retreat. The Black Dragon King's dodging was too big. It was like a sliding step, and he slid back more than 10 meters while maintaining a half-squatting position. Impossible! How did you know? Nefarian looked as if he had seen a ghost, even though his chin was so badly mangled that he looked like a ghost himself. Phew! I knew it! Duque heaved a sigh of relief. He pretended to put his hands behind his back, but was actually gesturing to his brothers. Theon held his sword in his right hand and covered Magni's wound with his left. He kept casting holy light on the Shorty King. Kalia, who was still in shock, started chanting to heal Kane's broken leg. Pure shadow damage and physical damage were better for healing. Old Bull's body trembled, and he pressed his broken leg against his wound. He had seen too many of his brethren lose their ability to fight because of injuries. In times of peace, if there was enough food, they would still have a good ending. However, in times of war or when there was a lack of food, they would have to end their own lives. Kane had no other thoughts. He only hoped that his broken leg could be reattached. Even if he could no longer fight, he could at least work. No, my power is not enough to expel that shadow power. Kalia cried. Old Bull's eyes turned red. He panted heavily and snorted. He propped himself up with the totem pole. Grom, do you still remember what I told you before we started the battle? Shut up. The battle is not over yet. If you want to say something, you should say it yourself. I will not be the sinner. Grom was also panting heavily. Enough. Duque suddenly yelled. I will heal your leg later. With a snap of his fingers, a clear liquid immediately appeared out of thin air and wrapped around the old cow's broken leg and wound. That wonderful ball of water kept spinning clockwise, but in the blink of an eye, it was completely dyed red. Kalia was shocked. He will lose too much. I know what to do. Duke held the spiral sword in his right hand and the obsidian queen in his left as he walked towards Nefarian, who was in a sorry state. Beside Duque, Gavin Rad, Grom, Vanessa, Elucia, and Sasha followed closely. Let's end this. Nefarian, you have at least 3 options. Duque approached Nefarian with a cold expression. 3 paths? Ha, ha. Nefarian struggled to get up. Scarlet blood stained his black hair. His face was filled with grief and indignation. It was said that there were 3 paths, but to him, none of them were paths. The first was to surrender. Duque probably wouldn't mind using him as a mount. The second was to maintain his current form as the Black Dragon Prince and be killed by the wrath of the giant dragon, created from his father's power source. The third was to accept Enzatha's power completely and use the mysterious magic that Enzath had given him as a last resort. If he succeeded, not only could he expel the holy will that Duque had imposed on him, he could even turn the tables. However, if they managed to turn the tables around, it would be hard to tell who would be the one to take the fruits of victory. Escape? Sorry. For an extremely arrogant black dragon, this was never within his scope of choice. Duque's expression was cold. He obviously didn't want Nefarian to choose the third path, as it would mean a lot of unknown trouble. Unfortunately, the choice wasn't in his hands. As expected, in the next second, Nefarian's entire body started to expand again. Purplish-black dragon scales, purple spikes, purple eyes filled with a strange aura, and even the shadow aura that usually filled the dragon's mouth turned into a purple gas with a sulfuric smell. Ha! Power! Power that mortals can never obtain in their entire lives. Ah, this power is so sweet and delicious. Why did I resist and hate this power so much in the past? Ha! Upon closer inspection, Nefarian's body was at least 1 size bigger than before. Even 30 meters away, One could clearly hear the cracking of his bones and the tearing of his muscles. That kind of ear-piercing sound made several heroines feel a little nauseous. In everyone's perception, Nefarian's entire body seemed to have been completely torn apart and reconstructed. His bones were forcefully stretched, and his muscles were torn apart. Then, a new unknown substance grew out and forcefully filled in the empty space that was torn apart. A huge and evil power came from the depths of the ground. This power was like the most turbid of torrents, and it easily destroyed the blood hall that Nefarian had painstakingly set up so that the larger Nefarian could have a wider space to stretch his huge body. The current Nefarian was probably more than 80 meters long, right? With a wingspan of nearly 100 meters, it made people feel like he was an absolute fortress in the sky. The moonlight shone on his huge body, giving off a demonic glow. Nefarian flapped his wings in the air and laughed maniacally. Haha, are you afraid? Are you desperate? Insignificant mortals. Tremble under my power. Nefarian spat out his venomous tongue without hesitation, venting his anger and arrogance. The corner of Duque's eyes twitched, and he finally sighed. Idiot! Do you think the power of an ancient god is so easy to obtain? What's more, you shouldn't have exposed yourself to the moonlight. Huh? Sorry to trouble you, Goddess Elun, Duque said softly. Suddenly, the sky and earth changed color. The moonlight was like water as it gently shone on Nefarian's body. To others, the moonlight that seemed harmless suddenly caused a terrifying change when it shone on Nefarian's body. What power is this? When Nefarian's huge dragon wings touched the moonlight, it was like a mortal's arm was placed in a pool of sulfuric acid, and it made a shocking sizzling sound. The huge dragon body fell from the sky and made a loud noise. Then he rolled on the balcony of the highest floor of the Blackrock Tower in agony. Other than Duque, everyone looked at the situation in front of them with their mouths agape. Idiot, do you think the will of a true god is so easy to expel? When I injected the will of a goddess into your body, your coordinates were already exposed to Elun's vision. Chapter 12:15. Suddenly, Sasha reminded them, look at the moon. Although most of the people's attention was still on Nefarian, everyone subconsciously glanced at the sky from the corner of their eyes. Then their eyes widened. The lonely moon in the sky was trembling slightly, and the stars in the sky were falling at a high speed. At that moment, the entire world of Azeroth seemed to resonate with this spectacle and trembled slightly. The thin clouds instantly dispersed, making way for these visitors from the sky. It was as if doomsday had arrived. Although Duque had seen this scene many times, he still could not suppress the shock in his heart every time he saw it. This was the power of a true god. But it was still a loss. For the sake of this starfall, King sacrificed a lot of my moral integrity. As Duque complained, he looked at the meteors falling from the sky like a spectator. These meteors were gathered into a straight line in an exaggerated manner and were accurately guided. They drew a sharp line of fire in the sky at high speed, and in the end, all of the lines of fire ended up on Nefarian's body. The overly inflated body weakened the Black Dragon King's agility. He tried his best to twist his body, but because he could not adapt to his new body, it led to the most despairing result. Every meteor landed accurately on Nefarian's back. The first two were blocked by the evil magic that erupted from his body, but from the third one onwards, he could only block it with his flesh and blood. Bam! 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 Like the beating of a drum, or like an earthquake, the huge impact hit Nefarian's huge body. The terrifying impact even traveled along the ground to the feet of Duque and the others. The obsidian tiles that had just been ravaged by the supersized monster Chromagus without a single crack were now almost cracking inch by inch. The entire ground was like a tsunami, moving up and down along with the huge tremors. Other than the especially nimble Vanessa and Sasha, no one else could stand firm in this kind of tremor. Seeing the terrifying meteor fragments flying in all directions, the only one who still had the energy to attack was Sasha. However, even after 11 meteorites fell, Nefarian was still alive. He stubbornly raised his head and stared at the sky. If the murderous glint in his eyes could be turned into a weapon that could cross the void, he would definitely destroy Elun first. Not enough. Duque's face was ashen. He would definitely be heavily injured, but there was always a chance. If Nefarian really managed to survive and become a complete Nefarian's apocalypse, things would get out of hand. Although the moon goddess Elun was a goddess of the righteous faction and had a large number of believers, she should be the same as the Dragon King of Dreams, Isra. There was some kind of restriction that prevented her from displaying her full power in the mortal world. Duque had shamelessly slapped Tyrant many times before Tyrant had the cheek to beg Elun for a one-time divine spell. Duque was not Elun's chosen one. There was too much evil in the world, and Elun could not give him any more support. That was already the limit. Then, the deciding factor would be the last falling star. At this moment, Nefarian no longer had time to care about Duque. All of his attention was focused on how to deal with the last and strongest meteor fall. At this moment, attacks that could make him feel threatened came one after another. The raging flames of the fire demon's hammer. The peerless wind and thunder of the sword of lightning. The bright holy light of the Ashbringer. The three powers combined into one and blasted into his right rib, causing him to let out a miserable cry. This was not the final attack. The most important thing was that the person who had appeared at the bottom of his throat had appeared. Duque held a dazzling dual divinity artifact sword in his hand and suddenly pierced his throat. No, every drop of magic power in all of Duque's magic circuits was on the line. He did not hold back in this attack, and it produced a destructive force that was enough to kill. Nefarian instinctively wanted to avoid this attack. Even with his evolved purple scales, it was impossible for him to block Duque's attack. However, when his neck was 3 meters back, he was horrified to discover another problem. If he maintained this speed and range, it would be equivalent to sending his head up to be hit by the last falling star. What a joke! What was the difference between this and putting his neck into the guillotine? He didn't even dare to let out his most instinctive dragon roar. Nefarian tried his best to tilt his neck to the left. Time seemed to have slowed down. Duque could even see the fear and smugness in Nefarian's eyes, because if Nefarian tilted his neck by 2 more degrees, he would be able to escape. That was if Nefarian could do it. The dragon's neck that was tilting back at high speed was suddenly stuck by something. It was a magic staff. It was stuck in the angle between the dragon's neck and back like a support. If it was an ordinary epic equipment, Nefarian's terrifying brute force would probably be able to crush it easily. Only it was a demi-artifact, the staff Obsidian Queen, that Duque had just drained of all its mana. If Duque had a choice, he would definitely not waste it and use a demigod staff as a support. Unfortunately, the quality of the other staffs he had was not up to standard. Who knew if an epic staff of the level of Mount Hyjal would have the hardness and toughness to withstand the attack of a level 85 boss like Nefarian's Apocalypse? He could only give it away. A mage's hand secretly stuck the falling star on Nefarian's spine. This little trick made Nefarian's movements slow down for 1/10 of a second. Just 1/10 of a second. But it was exquisite to the extreme. Duque pressed against Nefarian's chin and sent the head of the Black Dragon King right under the falling star. Boom! It was a huge collision that could shatter heaven and earth. The dazzling light flashed so brightly that none of the heroes dared to look at it. The scattered sand and stone fragments easily turned the surroundings into a mess. Cough, cough, cough. The sand and dust naturally caused people to cough. After a moment of panic, Gavin Rad was the first to react. Storm! Blow them away! With a wave of the wind sword, all the smoke and dust were blown away, revealing Nefarian's huge dragon corpse. Everyone could see that Nefarian's head had fallen off. Obviously, the current Black Dragon King that had all kinds of cruel scientific inventions was dead. Hooray! We won! Where's Duque? After instinctively cheering, everyone panicked again. Help! Duque was soaked in a pool of thick black dragon blood, almost drowning. Chapter 12:16. When Duque's last starfall hit Nefarian's head, it pierced through Nefarian's throat, followed by his cervical vertebrae. Then he activated Ice Barrier. Even with his Breaking Dawn mage's Ice Barrier, which was many times harder than Diamond, he almost couldn't withstand it. Under the huge impact, he was directly blasted into the huge pit under Nefarian's body. When the Ice Barrier's duration ended, Duque had no choice but to retract the high-density ice elemental barrier. Tragically, he found himself soaking in a pool of dragon blood. Blurg! Duque vomited, then used the water elemental barrier to clean himself up. Under the super high standard of the system elf's micromanipulation, Duke quickly became clean and shiny. Unfortunately, the stench of dragon blood on his body was immediately despised by his lovers. Sasha, who had a very sensitive nose, made an apologetic expression and retreated. Illugia silently activated her ice barrier, purifying the surrounding air. Duque recovered slightly, then ran to Kane's side. He raised his hand, and a visible dark aura flew into the air from Kane's thigh and circled around Duque's hand. Duque squeezed his hand, and it disappeared. Without any time to rest, Duque immediately switched to his priest form. At first, Duque was like a terrible priest trainee. There wasn't a single trace of holy light on him. But gradually, the holy light in the air, or rather, the holy will that had killed Nefarian, responded to Duque. Duque's lost moral integrity began to return. Twinkling like stars, they shone brilliantly. The golden light on Duque's body accumulated more and more. In a few breaths, Duque's golden light had already surpassed the level of a regional bishop. At this moment, Duque looked like a god. He was bathed in holy light, and his face was filled with kindness and love. His voice suddenly became magnetic and confident. The holy light will not give up on any warrior who fights against evil. With that, Duque opened his eyes. In his mind, the physiological knowledge he had learned in middle school, as well as the structure of the human body, were forced to appear in his mind by the system. From the system scan, Duque could see the flow of blood in every vein as if he had X-ray vision. In this era where there was no knowledge of anatomy, it was almost impossible to reattach a severed limb. Even the most powerful priest could only make the severely injured person place his or her leg against the severed limb to promote the proliferation of cells and speed up the regeneration of the flesh and blood. As for which blood vessel, whether the muscles and tendons were connected to the right place, only God knew. Duque was different. He condensed ice with his bare hands and created two perfect ice tweezers in the air. First, he pressed hard against Kane's leg bone and used holy light to stimulate the fusion of the bone and stimulate the growth of the bone marrow and nerves inside the leg bone. Then, at a dazzling speed, Duque used forceps to press against every broken nerve and blood vessel, and then used rune threads that he created on the spot to reconnect the blood vessels. Basically, other than the capillaries that were not connected, the large arteries, veins, and slightly larger blood vessels were all connected. Finally, the skin was stitched. Every stitch was stitched. When everything was done, Kane shouted in surprise, "My ancestors, I can feel my calf now." Everyone was shocked to see that Kane's toes were starting to move. "Don't move!" Duque shouted. Kane instantly froze like an obedient child. "Am I not healed?" Under the omnipotent holy light's treatment, the old bull felt wronged, his two thick index fingers pointing at each other. Duque carefully examined Kane's thigh. "It only looks healed. Many of the blood vessels inside might not be able to be reconnected. Some of the muscles and blood vessels might die. For the next 2 months, you are not allowed to go anywhere in Stormwind City. Otherwise, you will still be a one-legged bull." 2 months? Kane shouted in shock. The attending doctor, Duque, had a stern look in his eyes. "It will take 100 days for the tendons and bones to recover. I said 2 months because of your amazing regenerative ability." Suddenly, Duque realized that Grom was not there. Before Duque could ask, Theon said, "Grom said he went to kill the traitor." If he had not mentioned it, Duque would have forgotten that Lord Howl had risked his life to kill that idiot Rend Blackhand. Instead of being the orc chief, he had become the Black Dragon's dog. In any case, Nefarian had been killed, and the evil faction in the world had lost another flag. After defeating the boss, how could he not loot the corpse? Of course, Duque was not interested in the Shadow Flame staff or the Judgment set. There was something better in this world. Although the best equipment was bound to the soul, it could still be taken away as long as the owner was not decided. The hero team could not use it, but there were second-rate and third-rate people waiting for it. The only surprise was that Duque had found something incredible in Nefarian's dimensional bag. It looked like an ordinary greatsword of the Brotherhood, but the result of the system scan was Reforged Ashkandi, Greatsword of the Brotherhood. Although the quality of this sword was still epic, in the game, it was an exquisite item that could only be found in level 85 dungeons. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the best sword below divine weapons. Good sword. Unfortunately, no one wanted to use it here. Everyone here who could use a two-handed greatsword basically had a divine weapon. There was no such thing as an outdated divine weapon in this world. As long as they had better materials, they could increase their damage by another level. That was why no one wanted it, so they simply left it to Duque to handle. Duque casually put away the great sword and looked at his palm. At this moment, 3 gloomy flames floated in the air less than 5 centimeters above his palm. The divinity of fire and wind and thunder were collected earlier, and the new divinity of shadow was the spoils of war from killing Nefarian. Duque did not expect that he would have such a high affinity with the shadow element. Now, it was Duque's turn to be troubled. In this world, even the moon goddess Elun, whom he was most familiar with, would not tell him how to become a god. That was because every path to godhood was unique. But even a fool knew that the more types of divinity one obtained, the harder it would be to integrate them all. Moreover, a god with fire, wind and thunder, and shadow. What kind of god was this? Duke's head started to hurt. Just as Duque was thinking, Grom, who was covered in blood, returned. The blood-stained, Blood Howl, hung behind Lord Howl. Even though he was a little old, even though his hair was a little white, even though one of his hands was broken, Lord Howl was still Lord Howl. The hideous head in his remaining right hand said it all. Raising Rend Blackhand's head high, Lord Howl roared, Loktar, Ogre. Chapter 12:17. Loktar Ogre. If we don't win, we'd rather die. It was a sentence that made one's blood boil no matter how many times they heard it. It had long surpassed the meaning of words and had become a symbol, a totem, a symbol that represented the will of the orcs. To be honest, as long as there was a break in the war, Duque had at least a dozen ways to destroy or even destroy the horde. However, after hearing Grom's Loktar, Ogre, Duque suddenly felt a little unbearable. In Duque's heart, the history of Azeroth was the history of the Alliance and the Horde separation and union. As a human, Duque could not wait for the Horde to die. However, as a witness to a brand new history, Duque felt a little reluctant after integrating into this world. Phew! I'll cross the bridge when I get there, Duque whispered to himself. After dismissing the grudges between the Alliance and the Horde from his mind, Duque turned around and shouted, Vanessa, go skin the dragon. Damn, I'm your weak little handmaiden. You actually asked a lady to do this kind of rough work? Although Vanessa complained nonstop, her hands were not idle at all. She grabbed her Funkel skinning knife and ran over to Kieran. Just as Vanessa got close to Nefarian's huge purple body, something unexpected happened. Rumble. A violent spatial fluctuation alerted Duque's entire team. Everyone picked up their weapons and looked at the scene in front of them in shock. They did not know what was going on, but a pool of black water the size of a small lake suddenly spread across half of the highest peak of the Blackrock Spire. In the blink of an eye, many black tentacles emerged from the black water. Vanessa screamed and immediately activated Sprint. She jumped back 3 times and retreated into the cover of a few warriors. Seeing the system notification, Duque was shocked. He could not help but cry out, Enzos? It's me. What are you doing here? Your cage. It has nothing to do with the cage. I'm only here to collect the offerings that belong to me. Since that idiot Nefarian promised me that he would not be able to offer his sister Onyxia to me, he would make himself my sacrifice. I'll reluctantly recall him now. Enzo's terrifying voice seemed to come from all directions at the same time. It was clearly not the common human language, but it was directly understood on a spiritual level. This wasn't an intentional mental attack by Enzos. However, this act of stealing spoils of war still made Duque very unhappy. Take Nefarian's body? Have you asked for my permission? Duque snorted coldly and opened fire. The hundreds of magic circuits in his body, big and small, instantly operated to the limit. In the next moment, more than 1,000 dazzling magical lights dazzled everyone's eyes. Everyone thought that Enzos would use some strange magic shield to block Duque's attack. Unexpectedly, more than 1,000 octopus tentacles, nearly 100 meters tall, rose from the pitch-black pool. Enzos actually used his own limbs to forcefully block Duque's magic wave. What? Duke Marcus, we will give you the duel you want. But not now. A light sneer was carried by the wind. Along with the creepy laughter, Nzatha's tentacles, the black water, and Nefarian's huge corpse and head all disappeared into thin air like a dream. It was as if the Black Dragon King Nefarian had never existed, and the fierce battle that Duque and the others experienced was fake. Damn it! Gavin Rad stomped his feet, and the heavy leg guards made a clanking sound as they stepped on the hard ground. Duque patted Gavin Rad's shoulder and comforted him. Forget it. Even though our victory benefited more than one party, a victory is a victory. We should be happier. Gavin Rad felt a little better after hearing that. As if he was plundering the land, after plundering all the loot in the surroundings, Duke easily opened the teleportation door on the platform at the top of the tower, which was no longer obstructed by the powerful shadow energy, and connected to the teleportation room in Stormwind City. Almost as soon as they stepped out of the portal, Duque and the others were shocked by the cheers and exclamations. They understood the cheers, but why were they exclaiming? Holy light above, you're finally back. Duke Bolvar for Dragon, who was left behind, rushed over immediately. What's wrong? Bolvar, what happened? Something big. Of course it's something big. A week before Duque and the others returned, something big happened in the Alliance. The cause of the matter was originally a small matter that did not seem serious. When Naxxramas was wreaking havoc all over the world, Alexandros Mograine, who had announced his retirement to the second line, had no choice but to take up the heavy responsibility of defending the holy city of Stratholme. On this day, his eldest son, Reynold, found him. Father, I want to propose to Sally. What? Alexandros was shocked when he heard this. The next moment, a wave of anger filled old Mograine's face. You unfilial son. Say that again if you dare? Reynolds was shaken, but his desire for love drove him to his head, and he roared recklessly, I like Sally. What's wrong with that? We've been together since we were young, and I love her. I want to make her my wife. What answered Reynold was an angry punch from his old father. The fist, which was filled with holy light, sent Renaud spinning in the air before he fell to the ground in a sorry state, knocking over a pile of tables and chairs. You bastard! Sally Whitemane was entrusted to me by my comrade before he died. She's my stepdaughter. In Lordaeron's household register, her name is in my children's column. If she wants, she can even inherit my surname, Mograine. Alessandro gave his eldest son a hard kick. She's your sister. Legally. On the basis of justice. You actually want to defile her? You're raping her. Are you crazy or what? Faced with his father's roar, Reynold argued. I'm not related to Sally by blood. Shut up. You've learned the way of the holy light for so many years. What did you learn? Alexandros was furious. This has nothing to do with the holy light. I love her. Father, let me ask you, if she wasn't your daughter, would you allow me to marry her? Reynold roared. Old Mograine paused for a full 3 seconds. His livid face finally squeezed out 3 words. You deserve it. Chapter 12:18. You're not worthy. These 3 words were like a bolt from the blue. It fiercely struck Reynolds's head, shattering his spirit, dignity, and pride, leaving not a single shred of it behind. He was a very competitive person. As the son of the famous Ashbringer, his noble birth did not make him lose his desire to fight. He always wanted to be a hero like his father, but as the son of the Ashbringer, he was always shrouded in his father's light. His competitive nature did not want to rely on his father's protection. He wanted to prove to his father that he was a brave and fearless warrior. Unfortunately, Renaud was born at the wrong time. Ever since Alexandros successfully became a paladin, Renaud had been trained as a paladin. In fact, his talent was not too bad. It would not be a problem for him to become a third-rate paladin. However, because the Alliance had Duque, the strongest group of paladins was basically preserved. The top paladins were the 4 Silver Saints and Alexandros. Below them were Riadeline, Abendis, Bolvar, and Reginald Windsor. The third-rate paladins Duque did not care about them at all. However, Renaud's own strength was not just one level lower. Alright, the Alliance did not lack paladins, but they lacked priests. Without a priest, Duque would be in a difficult position. Not only did he have to use Benedettas, who he knew was a scam, Duque did not hesitate to drag Kalia along. In the end, he remembered that Sally did not fall into the Scarlet Crusade in this life. In the end, Duque, who was roping in able-bodied men all over the world, captured Sally as well. As a result, after the Molten Core expedition, Sally Whitemane, who was Renaud's childhood friend, suddenly became the new heroine of the Alliance. The entire Holy Church was singing Sally's name. What new generation saintess, what hope of the holy light, it was as mushy could be. Without comparison, there would be no harm. The adopted daughter that he brought back became a hero, while his own son looked like a mediocre paladin. It would be strange if Alexandros had a good expression. The old man did not approve of Renaud's performance. He found fault with his son everywhere and often reprimanded Renaud in public. This made Renaud, who was extremely proud, very unhappy. In fact, the great lord had always hoped that his son would become a true hero. Perhaps this was what it meant to be resentful of iron for not becoming steel. If it had been another family, perhaps the father and son would have been able to reach some sort of balance and continue to maintain their reputation. Unfortunately, their surname is Mograine. From the old Lordaeron to the new Lordaeron, from the Terinas to the Kalia eras, their every move would be magnified infinitely. Almost on the same night that Renaud was reprimanded, rumors began to spread in the city. High Lord Alessandro was going to abolish the elder and replace the younger with the younger, so that his youngest son, Darian Mograine, would inherit the title. He was even going to take back the famous Ashbringer when Theon retired. Darian was Alexandros' youngest son. Like most families, Alexandros loved his youngest son very much, which also caused Reynolds to be extremely jealous of his younger brother. 3 days later, Reynolds suddenly came looking for his father. Marshal Mograine. The scourge has been spotted upstream of the Soderil River, west of Stratholme. In the military camp in the city, Reynolds rushed back with a scout who was half covered in blood and had been hit by a dark magic spell. Alessandro immediately stood up and clapped his hands, using exorcism to expel the dark power from the scout's body. What? How many soldiers are there? About 3,000 normal bones, 500 ghouls, more than 20 low-level death knights, and a possibly mid-level lich, the scout replied weakly. Alessandro handed the scout over to the army's priest and took out an epic weapon from his dimensional bag, the Hammer of Fate, that looked like 2 large bones attached to a stick. This crimson weapon was not just a little bit inferior to the Ashbringer he used before, but it was still an item of Mount Hyjal level, so it was passable. Gather the mobile troops on duty. Move out immediately. After giving the order, Alessandro turned to look at Abendis. Alfred, I'll leave Stratholme to you. Don't worry. They were old partners, so they could understand each other's thoughts with just a look. While the floating fortress Naxxramas was running around the world, the two of them were basically guarding the Stratholme area. Abendis, who was better at defense, was in charge of guarding the city, while old Mograine, who was stronger in attack, was in charge of cleaning up the remnants of the scourge. Under old Mograine's leadership, a team of 50 professionals, mainly paladins, accompanied by 300 knights and 2,000 rapid response infantry, set off from Stratholme. The so-called rapid response infantry was, to put it bluntly, infantry who could barely ride horses. Their skills were not enough for them to fight on war horses, so they purely used horses as a means of rapid movement. When they got close to the battlefield, they would dismount and fight in traditional infantry phalanxes. Originally, when Duque set up this unit, he wanted to call it the Dragon Cavalry according to the customs on Earth. However, he was strongly criticized by a certain queen from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. How dare they call themselves Dragon Cavalry without riding dragons? In the end, they changed it to the Rapid Response Infantry. In flat areas, the Alliance had basically deployed tanks, but in areas with complex terrain, where gnome helicopters had not yet been popularized, the traditional Griffin Knights and cavalry were still the most useful. The Scourge was the most troublesome thing. Once it appeared, it would spread like the plague if it was not put out immediately. If they did not leave it alone for 3 days, the Scourge could turn all living people within a radius of hundreds of kilometers into zombies. Ordinary local armies had no way of dealing with the remnants of the Scourge. The only thing they could do now was to improve the warning system as much as possible, and then use the elites to wipe them out. Under the reconnaissance and guidance of the Griffin Knights, Old Mograine and his team quickly arrived at the scene. What made them angry was that the Scourge was planning to pour pots of unknown green substances into the river. Needless to say, it was most likely a deadly poison. This made Old Mograine furious. The Soderer River was not only the dividing line between the East and West Plaguelands, but also a very important lifeline for the entire Lordaeron kingdom. The water that flowed from its source ran from north to south across the entire Lordaeron kingdom, and its tributaries watered 70% of the kingdom's farmland. Not only that, but in the middle of the river was a very important inland freshwater lake, Lake Daramir. Not long ago, Duque had reached an agreement with the Hydrothean water elemental. The water elemental had sent experts to purify Lake Daramir and turn it into Lordaeron's most important freshwater fish farm. Chapter 12:19. To the south of the river, the water would flow through the most fertile Hillsbrad Hills in the entire Lordaeron continent, irrigate places like Terran Mill, and finally flow into the sea at the edge of Southsea City. It was no exaggeration to say that the Soderer River was the lifeline of half of the Lordaeron continent. What the Calamity Army was doing now was forcing millions of people to their deaths. Attack! Raising the hammer of fate high up, the entire Rapid Response Force looked down from the sky and turned into a huge arrow that charged toward the Calamity Army by the river. The charge of thousands of warhorses created the momentum of an army of thousands. The earth was shaking and the sky was shaking. Kill these bones. The soldiers' blood was boiling. Following the famous hero, Ashbringer Mograine, to charge was the battle they pursued. Even if they were led by the nose by the Calamity Army, they still chased after each battle without hesitation. Because every battle against the undead was given honor. This was a battle of honor to protect their families and the beautiful creatures of this world. Due to the limitations of their talents, they would never have the chance to step into the realm of heroes and participate in the epic battles that were praised by bards for thousands of years. They were only mortals. However, even if they bled to the last drop of their blood, they would never regret it. This was because the great commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, once said, "Those who use their lives and souls to protect their beliefs and hopes are already heroes. Your heroic deeds will always be worthy of respect." This sentence inspired them every day, every moment, every minute, and every second. Mortals could also use their powers to protect this world. Charge! Alexandros led Renault and the Paladins and took the lead in breaking through the enemy's formation. On the two flanks behind them, the Alliance's lieutenants had the infantrymen slow down and dismount 200 yards away from the enemy. After a short jog, a neat battle line that could be measured with a ruler was formed. When the battle began, it was already an invincible battle formation that could sweep away all obstacles in its path. The infantrymen followed closely behind the cavalry and spread out a battle line that was 500 meters long. They used one-handed hammers and other blunt weapons to destroy every undead that blocked their way. Everything was going smoothly until they went deep into the enemy's formation. Suddenly, they realized that almost every inch of land on the shore and the place they had just rushed through was shaking. Countless undead crawled out from the ground. A trap? Alexandros was shocked. If it was just low-level undead creatures like zombies and skeleton soldiers, he wouldn't care if there were hundreds of thousands of them. The important thing was that they were all intermediate undead at the level of bone devils and ghouls. They were also accompanied by a large number of hatred beasts and zombie dogs. This was not an enemy an ordinary soldier with a demon slayer enchanted longsword could deal with. Everyone head south. Old Mograine raised Hammer of Fate and pointed south. It's a wise judgment, but unfortunately, it's meaningless. Along with a cold laugh, Thizad's undying figure wrapped in an evil aura appeared on top of a small hill in the direction they came from. A large number of high-ranking Death Knights and high-ranking Liches appeared from all four directions, and the ones leading them were people that Alexandros was familiar with. Old Mograine's voice was choked with emotion. The few people that came into view were all powerhouses that he had high hopes for. They were just a little bit away from stepping into the hero realm. Duchess Blamo, Sir Zeliek, Lord Kurtas. Mograine had all worked with them before. He was even more clear that Blamu and Zeliek had developed feelings for each other and had become lovers after spending a long time together. He had wanted to attend their wedding after the Cataclysm attack, but who would have thought, now they had undoubtedly stepped into the hero realm, but unfortunately, they were Death Knights. It was as if they were breaking through the waves and easily killed the elites trained by old Mograine. They reached Mograine almost effortlessly. Join us. You will become the head of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Blamua's eyes were filled with dark magic and emitted a strange light. Old Mograine did not say anything and directly swung his warhammer at the 3 Death Knights. This was not the first time, nor would it be the last. As long as a comrade died and became an undying, then they would be enemies in another world. Hadesh, Alexandros roared 3 times, and with each roar, he easily sent a horseman of the apocalypse flying. This power, Thizad looked at old Mograine, and his red eyes flickered non-stop. Suddenly he attacked. Bind. Dozens of greenish-black chains of dark energy appeared from the void and bound Mograine tightly in an instant. What made the surrounding soldiers even more frightened was that Alexandros' eldest son, Reynold, actually stabbed his sword into his father's chest. The blade pierced through the joint under the left armpit, through the lung, and straight into the heart. No matter how thick the plate armor was, it could not protect this area. When Reynolds' sneak attack broke through the thin layer of chainmail at the armpit joint, the result was already decided. It's over. Father, your brutal rule over me is over. Reynolds' eyes were red, with the same scarlet glow as Thizad's. At this moment, anyone would know that Reynolds' soul had already fallen. At this moment, there was one less holy knight in the world and one more Death Knight. Without you binding me, I'm finally free. Reynolds laughed wildly. He did not notice the abnormality of his father's body. Alexandros, who should have been fatally injured and could not even speak, suddenly let out a long sigh. It's time to end. Although I always wanted to believe that you were not the second Arthas. What? Reynolds was terrified. He suddenly realized that the assassination that he had carefully prepared for so long and simulated countless times in his mind had failed. The illusion in front of him faded, and Reynolds finally saw that he had stabbed a water elemental that looked exactly like his father. It was not his father. His father was standing at the side with the fiercest and coldest gaze, staring at him. Impossible? Reynolds cried out in shock. There are many things that are impossible. Following old Mograine's cold laugh, Thizad was shocked to find that the teleportation barrier he had carefully set up was torn apart. Hundreds of teleportation gates appeared outside the Scourge army. With Tyrant as the leader, the Alliance powerhouses all appeared. Chapter 12:20. The High Priestess of the Night Elves raised her hand gently, and countless pieces of the stars drew a beautiful arc in the air, falling from the sky and landing on the heads of the undead creatures. Most of the undead creatures would take such an attack head-on. Only a few of the Scourge army's powerhouses could avoid this attack. In the face of Tyrant's attack, The three horsemen of the apocalypse had no choice but to roll miserably with their skeletal warhorses and fall from the hillside. Only then did they manage to roll out of the range of the meteor fragments. Rumble! There were loud noises as the meteors exploded where the undead creatures were gathered. The scorching air current swept across the battlefield. After a large number of bones were smashed into pieces, even the dregs were sent flying more than 10 meters away by the successive shockwaves. The remaining Rotterdam warriors exclaimed and gasped in surprise as they found that most of the undead creatures had been wiped out. Turalian, Sidon Dathrahan, and Abendis, the three paladin warriors, arrived at the same time. The holy light on their bodies was so dazzling that it was like three moving, blazing mountains of gold. All the impure creatures near them were swept into the golden light and completely melted. For the Lich, the newly born Death Knight did not even have time to use his soul to shout the slogan before he was completely drowned in the holy flames. Kel, Thuzad watched as the Death Knights he was so proud of had their armors destroyed in front of him by the holy light, which was equivalent to high heat for the undead. Their hard and withered muscles, dry bones, and clumped-up internal organs were revealed. Then, the dark aura that lingered around their bodies was blown away as if it was evaporating. Finally, their entire bodies, along with their fallen souls, turned into ashes. The chief Great Lich under the Lich King was stunned on the spot. The Alliance's powerhouses had arrived at the right time. They were so accurate that they had arrived within seconds. This could not be a coincidence. Even if they had suddenly received a distress signal, they would not have had enough armor to wear in such a short time. How could they have mobilized so many powerhouses in one go? It could only be said that the Alliance must have received the news long ago and used Renault's rebellion to prepare a big trap for the Scourge army. If Kel, Thuzad's sweat glands could still function, he would probably be sweating profusely by now. Repent for what you have done to tarnish the Sunwell. Following Sylvanas' angry roar, an arrow emitting dazzling lightning seemed to shoot from the distant sky, easily hitting Kel, Thuzad's magic shield. The whole space around the Grand Lich seemed to tremble slightly, and countless dark lines spread out from the point of contact between the magic shield and the tip of the arrow, intertwining with the lightning triggered by the power of thunder in a dazzling flash. The two forces intertwined and formed a huge net. In the next instant, more golden lights collided with the net. It was a long-range attack from the artifact, Quell, Zarum. At that moment, the golden holy light and the purple lightning finally suppressed the dark and icy aura. The three powers formed a sharp whistle, followed by a huge explosion. The explosion shone with a blinding light, but that was it. Everyone was surprised to see this scene. Kel, Thuzad actually stopped under the intense impact and light of the explosion. No, every expert from the Alliance wanted to shout out the word impossible, but the air seemed to have become as sticky as glue. What now? The warriors who came with old Mograine were the most confused about the situation. They thought it was an ordinary extermination of the remnants of the Scourge army, but it turned into a decisive battle with the main force of the Scourge army. They saw that Alexandros had the upper hand, but suddenly the son of the Ashbringer betrayed them and stabbed his father's vital point. It felt like a repeat of the tragedy of Arthas killing his father. They thought that it was going to be a tragedy this time, but who knew that the experts of the Alliance would arrive and turn the situation around again? Who knew that when the Alliance saw that they had the upper hand, it was as if time had stopped? What was it this time? To the surprise of all the living, the Scourge army also heard cries of surprise. They saw the faces of the Death Knights with bewildered expressions. An evil will from the faraway stars, from the darkest void of the universe, had descended. When the projection of the huge will descended on this battlefield, the space shook. The length and width of the battlefield were at least 3,000 meters, and it could collapse at any time because it could not withstand the huge pressure. In their field of vision, the entire shoreline of the wide and turbulent Soderil River was twisted like a fried dough twist. The sand and stones on the ground floated into the air as if they were defying gravity. The wide battlefield had become the most incredible and strange space. The rapid river slammed against the riverbank, and there should have been a loud sound like a huge wave hitting a reef, but no one could hear any sound. The only sound that everyone heard was a strange sound. If one had to describe what this sound sounded like, it could only be said that it sounded like a monster with a big mouth chewing a large amount of glass shards in its mouth. The will that stood at the pinnacle of evil had an extremely strong pressure that spread in all directions. It made the low-level undead creatures fall to the ground and tremble, not daring to move an inch. The middle and high-level undead creatures lowered their heads and did not dare to look directly at the projection. The faces of the mortal soldiers were all pale, and their foreheads were dripping with cold sweat. Their eyes had turned dark because of extreme fear, and they could not see anything. Their hearts were like a lonely boat drawn into a terrifying whirlpool that could capsize at any time and drown in the endless tide of death. The one that appeared was one of the 3 heads of the Burning Legion, Jaden. The huge red demon leader laughed sinisterly. Yo! The ants that dare to defy the will of the Legion, and the despicable traitors that dare to betray me, it's time to settle accounts. Ha! Accompanied by the demon's wanton laughter, everyone on the battlefield was horrified to find that the space was distorting further. Jaden seemed to want to tear the entire battlefield into pieces, or throw it out of the world of Azeroth. Get closer to me! Ronan shouted. Spatial magic was not Ronan's specialty. As a genius in the arcane system, Ronan also had good attainments in spatial magic. Especially under Duque's guidance, Ronan was instilled with a large amount of ordinary astronomical knowledge that he thought was common knowledge. To a native of the world of Azeroth, this was undoubtedly a great awakening. Ronan's spatial magic improved by leaps and bounds because of this. It was obviously unrealistic to protect everyone from the demon leader's shocking conspiracy. The only people Ronan could protect were the strongest people around him. Chapter 12:21. Quite a few powerhouses closed in on Ronan, but 2 of them were too far away to bother. This was because Sylvanas and Tyrande were already in front of Thuzad. For Salis. Sylvanas angrily attacked Thuzad. She would never be able to forgive him. Even if Thuzad didn't personally harm her people, she would still be able to do so. However, it was to resurrect this bastard that Arthas slaughtered a city, burned Eversong Forest, destroyed Silvery Moon City, and destroyed the Sunwell. Fool! Even in this state, he still wanted to destroy his enemy first? Thuzad's skeletal eyes flashed with red light. Even though the surrounding space was almost stagnant, and he was in the center of the time stop, the frost-like white spell runes still flashed above Thuzad's white finger bones one after another. He stretched out his hand and pointed at the void, instantly freeing himself. Jaden. If you were in Azeroth right now, you might really succeed. The Lich grinned, his white lower jaw seeming to make a mocking expression. The Great Lich's huge finger bones pointed, and the white runes burned like flames. It burned fiercely, forming an illusory ice scepter. This scepter was like a battering ram, and with a wave of Thuzad's arms, it slammed into the void heavily. It was clearly a scepter, but it was full of violent aesthetics. The impact it produced was so strong that the void in front of everyone slightly paused. Void Recall. This evil spell could instantly destroy the spatial shackles of the same level or even higher than the caster, teleporting the caster to a previously designated location. However, like all other emergency escape spells, the backlash was equally shocking. Even with Thuzad's strength as a Breaking Dawn Great Lich, he would inevitably be greatly injured after returning. On the other side, Tyrande glanced at Ronan in the distance, who had already used a purple arcane shield to cover several people. She knew that there was no time to lose. Suddenly she was wrapped in a milky white light, and her whole body shot out like an arrow. She grabbed Sylvanas and slammed into the light produced by Thuzad's teleportation. Thuzad suddenly felt a strong sense of fear towards these 2 mortals. He didn't know if his magic was enough to take the 3 of them out of Jaden's wide space trap. But in the next moment, he immediately discovered that Tyrande was only using the power of the moon goddess to bind him. She did not interfere with his magic. Ha! You will regret this. Thuzad's laughter echoed in the void. At the last moment, Servana spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. Returning to the present. After listening to Balver's report, Duque's face turned green, and his hands trembled as he held the report. Something terrible had happened. Ronan, Turalian, Alfred Abendis, and Sidon Dathrahan have disappeared during the teleportation. They didn't have a choice. This was because, under the Trickster Kill Jaden's plot, the evil forces hidden around the world had already begun their attack. If they didn't do anything, Azeroth would be destroyed before the Burning Legion's main force arrived. At this moment, Duque finally felt the weight on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and exhaled the turbid air from his lungs. Duque raised his head slightly. His clear voice echoed in the entire Stormwind Council Hall. I have to admit that our enemies are very strong. They are strong, terrifying, sinister, far-sighted, and numerous. However, this isn't a reason for us to give in and retreat. Since Kill Jaden has the ability to gather so many evil forces together, shouldn't we eliminate them all at once? At once? Eliminate them all? Everyone almost thought that Duque was talking in his sleep. Duque smiled and turned to look at Magni. I announce that Area 51 will be unsealed immediately. It seems that we have to use that thing inside. That thing? Magni's eyes instantly lit up. Chapter 1222. Area 51, DuPont's Bad Taste. This was a top-secret area that only relevant craftsmen, scientists, and secret troops would enter. In the upper echelons of the Alliance, basically only 3 to 5 people in each kingdom knew of the existence of Area 51. However, thinking about Duque, the dwarves, and the gnomes, he had a rough idea of what was going on. My plan needs support from many parties. I'll summon the Dalajan Kirin Tor and Jurban urgently. Before that, I'll go look for Elune. Duque ran to the Church of Elune in Stormwind City as if his butt was on fire. As a liaison and part of the strengthening of the Alliance, Stormwind allowed Elune to preach in the kingdom. Thus, a small temple of the Moon Lady was built in a corner of the church district. Under the guidance of the priestess, Duque came all the way to the roofless main hall. Even during the day, Duque could easily sense the will of the goddess. Duke Marcus, you're here? No matter how many times the goddess gaze always gave Duque a sense of peace. Yes, goddess. I'm eager to know about my lover. They're both fine. My power is still protecting them for now. But you, who experienced the ancient war, know that my protection is never perfect. Duque was a little silent. He still remembered that in the ancient war, the Eridar Gemini had only forcefully dragged Tyrande back to the twisting nether. This had cut off Tyrande's connection with Elune, and then easily destroyed Tyrande's mental defenses. If not for Duque playing infernal affairs in the Burning Legion and becoming a Void Lord, there might have been a fallen demoness called Tyrande Whisperwind in this life. Duque sighed. Kel, Thuzad and Arthes wouldn't dare to go to the twisting nether even if they had 10,000 guts. Elune's illusory figure also sighed. I hope you know that Sylvanas Windrunner is not my priestess. My protection is not perfect for her. I'll do it as soon as possible. Duque gritted his teeth. You have a month. Elune nodded. Duque did not even dare to imagine how much divine power it would take to protect the high priest in the enemy's formation, but he also had to bring along a burden. In any case, Elune couldn't be more kind. Duque knew that this was all because he had once saved Azeroth. Duque bowed deeply. Thank you very much. I don't need your gratitude. I just want to punish Thun this time. Their craziness. Although Elune and Thun and the other ancient gods were known as gods, they were completely different. Thanks to Daddy Blizzard's crazy setting changes, he had a good habit of eating his own settings. Duque, who had arrived a few years earlier, didn't know whether Elune was an ancient deity, an Azeroth astral soul, or a titan. In any case, they were the best allies on the side of justice. At this moment in Naxxramas, if Kel, Thuzad still had balls, he'd be in a lot of pain. In the core area of Naxxramas, there was now a terrifying specially made prison. 8 liches stared at the pair of beauties cuddling together in the middle of the prison day and night. Of course, for a group of liches who no longer had a penis, No matter how beautiful a mortal woman was, it had nothing to do with them. I advise you to give up quickly and join the great Lich King. You won't last long. I will make one of you a Dark Ranger general, and the other my right-hand man. Thuzad persuaded them to surrender. In the center of the Lich's vision, two beautiful women were hugging together, their red lips almost touching. If one didn't pay attention, they would really think that the two had been dead for a long time. In the eyes of the undying, it was another scene. The two's heartbeats were very slow, but their vitality was still strong. Their small noses gently touched each other, and after about a minute, a long and small breath came from one of their nostrils. It was purified by the power of the moon goddess on the surface of their bodies, and then inhaled into the other's nostrils. This was a state of suspended animation, similar to hibernation. Thuzad gritted his teeth in hatred. It was bad enough that he was tricked by Jaden, but he actually let two living people hitch a ride and escape. If he could kill the two of them and turn them into undying, it would undoubtedly be a big success for the Scourge army. After all, they were the leaders of two kingdoms. Who knew that Elune would not hesitate to use a huge amount of divine power to forcibly transmit her power to protect the two of them? Thuzad was mad. He used abominations to cut them, and a large number of liches to grind them. He tried almost everything, but he couldn't hurt the two women in the slightest. Originally, he wanted to starve them to death, but who knew that they actually had a way to enter a state of suspended animation, successfully stalling for time. Obviously, with his Breaking Dawn strength, he couldn't shake the protection of the moon goddess. Bastard! When the Great Lord wakes up, it will be the day of your fall. Thuzad could only hope that Arthas, who had fused with the Lich King Nazul, would wake up. Unfortunately, that seemed to be something that would happen in the indefinite future. After Arthas put on the Lich King's helmet, her entire body and soul were sealed on the frozen throne, and there was no more sound. The fusion of souls was very complicated, and no one could tell how long it would take. Thuzad could only wait. On the other side, after Duque bid farewell to Alan, he waited for the Dalajan Kirin Tor senators. Duque first bowed to the Kirin Tor senators, then went straight to the point. As everyone knows, Chairman Ronan is temporarily missing. According to the previous agreement, I will exercise my authority as the Kirin Tor Senate's substitute chairman and temporarily take over the leadership of the Kirin Tor Senate. Of course. A few of the senators returned the bow. After the Dalajan kingdom was destroyed by the Scourge army, the neutrality of the Kirin Tor Senate had actually disappeared. This was because, including the new Dalajan city, almost the entire kingdom was rebuilt within the framework of the alliance. If in the past, the countries at most used the method of adding water to milk, now it was simply adding milk to water. In particular, a few of the senators had basically been forcefully pulled to the radiant moon level by Duque, so the Kirin Tor Senate had a new law that stated that any Breaking Dawn level mages in the alliance would be automatically regarded as the substitute chairman of the Kirin Tor Senate, regardless of their nationality. When the Dalajan Reagan and Miao Hong's elected chairman was absent, or was unable to perform the duties of a chairman, with the agreement of more than 3 senators, the substitute chairman would be able to take the position. Right now, Duque was just going through the motions. After a few words, Duque's long title had an additional Kirin Tor Senate. Very quickly, the great gnome craftsman Jurban Mekatok arrived. Duque looked around, looked at Jurban, Magni, and the few Kirin Tor Senate members, and said in a clear voice, "I announce. The Sky-Breaking Plan, activate." Chapter 1223. Leonard was a low-grade lich. Since he was a human sky wizard when he was alive, his soul was captured by the Lich King after he died, and he naturally became a lich. In the Barren Lands, his undead soldiers were gathering the corpses of a village that had been slaughtered. The quality of orc skeletons and zombies is indeed better than that of humans. It's a pity that orcs don't have the chance to give birth to lich. It was a very ordinary sentence to himself, but in the end, he was shocked to find that it took dozens of times longer for his thoughts to be conveyed. Speed reduction. He realized something, but he was powerless to change the situation. He wanted to call for help, but none of the skeletons around him could sense his mental commands. In the next moment, his consciousness completely dissipated. He did not even know that a young wizard in a blue and white robe was standing behind him. Interesting. Very interesting. Duque touched Leonard's skull. The soul ability he learned from the Burning Legion came in handy. When Leonard's memories, as well as the spiritual communication channel and the Lich King's magic imprint, were all transferred to the system elf for categorization, Duque touched his chin. The so-called soul-searching spell is nothing more than this, right? Vanessa ridiculed Duque's actions at the right time. The terrifying Duke of Beasts filth has finally broken through the sky? Have you fallen to the point where you won't even let go of the bones? Duque was speechless. Damned maid, don't speak nonsense. I didn't do anything out of line. Oh, you even used a white liquid to dye the Black Dragon Princess white? Vanessa turned her head in disdain. Vanessa's evidence was 2F** king sufficient. Duque was actually speechless. However, in the next moment, Duque raised his hand. Duque did not cast any spell, but a ball of flames flashed and turned the lich lying on the ground into ashes in a flash. The lich's clothes and equipment were not damaged at all. Master, you, tell Jaina to act according to plan. At the same time, Thuzad felt extremely annoyed. After becoming a great lich, he thought that he had lost the emotions that a living person should have. Unfortunately, the mental attributes of anger and irritation remained in his soul. He did not know how long Duque's attack on Blackwing's nest would last, nor did he know if Jaden had a deeper plan against the Scourge army. He only knew that he had to take advantage of the fact that these living beings were busy taking care of themselves to gather more powerful servants for the Lich King. The Troll's riot is just a trick. The one who can truly influence this world is the one behind Angela. Thuzad used the red light in his skull's eye sockets to scan the audience. There, the three horsemen of the apocalypse were using shadow energy to repair their bodies. At that time, Jaden's spatial trap was a little strange. It felt a little lacking in lethality. Although the Doomsday army suffered a lot of losses, it was not fatal. For example, among the three horsemen of the apocalypse, Kurtaz, who was the most heavily injured, had only lost his lower body. It was fatal to the living, but it was nothing more than that to the undying. Thuzad was still dissatisfied. Not good enough. There must be a strong enough individual. It would be better if it was a paladin. After becoming a great lich, he had done a lot of inhuman experiments. He had basically come to the conclusion that the strongest undying must be transformed from the strongest living beings. Without the living, there would be no dead. The growth of the Scourge army still needed to be filled by strong living beings. This was not good news for Thuzad, who believed in the supremacy of the dead. Before the Lich King woke up again, as a servant, Thuzad could only follow the existing rules. Looking at Renaud Maugraine, who was standing a little further away, Thuzad felt a little annoyed. This kid had not shown his value at all. If he had succeeded in assassinating his father and dragged the famous Ashbringer into the realm of the dead, Thuzad might have given him the position of a second-rate leader. But now, a third-rate Death Knight, scram to where you want to go. Raising his huge palm, his sharp bony fingers pointed to the east. Thuzad ordered, Naxxramas, begin movement. Target South Sea City. Thuzad's memories as a human were not that long ago. He was very clear that humans were fragile creatures that would starve to death without food. At this time, in the Eastern Kingdom, the production areas of the southern continent were concentrated in the western wilderness and the elven forest. The problem was that the despicable Duque had managed Stormwind like an iron bucket. The Sentinel territory had been upgraded to a Sentinel stronghold, forming a defensive chain with the West Spring stronghold. In addition, a large number of cavalry and tanks formed a rapid response force, making the small forces of the Scourge army useless. In order to show the power of the Scourge army and let the once suppressed cult of the Cursed rise again, Thuzad thought that it was necessary to destroy the capital of the Alliance as an example. Just like what Arthas had done 6 years ago. South Sea City, This was a miracle city that had developed from a small seaside town 20 years ago. As an important port connecting the northern and southern continents by sea, South Sea City's defense was also not bad. However, it still lacked the foundation of an old kingdom's main city. The city walls could be completed by the dwarves' machinery, but the magic protection rune engraving work on the city walls could not be done quickly. A mage's magic and mental strength were limited. Even the strongest mage could only spend an hour a day engraving magic runes. Therefore, the magic protection level of South Sea City could only be considered below average. In fact, the same situation was happening in New Lordaeron City, but Thuzad thought that His Majesty the Lich King would be more interested in attacking Lordaeron City himself. The time he chose was very sneaky, letting Naxxramas approach in the air just after nightfall. If everything went well, Naxxramas could raid South Sea City at around 12 o'clock in the middle of the night. For humans, nighttime was a time when their field of vision was greatly reduced, but for the undead who could only perceive the outside world with their souls, this was the golden time of the undead. Everything seemed to be going well, until Thuzad was shocked to see a huge floating island no smaller than Naxxramas in the sky above South Sea City. That is, Thuzad would never forget the domed purple mage towers that stood on the island. That was the crystallization of magic wisdom that had been settled for 2,800 years. It was also a testament to human magic civilization. Although it had been destroyed by the Scourge army once, it was obvious that it had been rebuilt. And it appeared in a new form in front of the Scourge army. Thuzad's voice was almost whispering, "Dalajan?" Chapter 12:24. Mortals couldn't imagine how a city weighing millions of tons could be lifted into the sky. This wasn't scientific at all. Discussing science in a magical world was often nonsense. In fact, after Duque accepted Ronan as his disciple, he had discussed with Ronan whether they should find a chance to rebuild the Dalajan and lift the Dalajan into the sky. Who knew that Ronan's reaction would be dumbfounded? Into the sky? How is that possible? We mages can't even fly ourselves. How can we make a city fly into the sky? At that moment, Duque was also dumbfounded. This couldn't be blamed on Duque, because before he traveled to this world, there had never been any official explanation as to what principles were used to make the Dalajan and Naxxramas rise into the sky. Once, Duque had searched for it on Baidu out of frustration. It turned out that Daddy Blizzard was very unreliable and didn't explain anything. Instead, he found similar information in the Dungeons & Dragons setting book, which was the foundation of the World of Warcraft game. In the ancient Nesser Empire, there was a genius mage who developed a magic treasure called the Mice Energy Core. This artificial magic device looked like a crystal ball, but it had a diameter of nearly 50 meters. The sphere emitted a very bright light, as dazzling as looking directly at the sun, and there were some dark shadows moving on its surface. A gorgeous pedestal was fixed to this perfect spherical device. Its function was very simple. It transmitted the original energy of the magic network of Mystaira, the goddess of the weave in Dungeons & Dragons, to the entire land. This allowed the Arcanist to create an anti-magnetic field between the entire magic network and the land without the need to cast permanent magic, which allowed the huge mountain to float in the air. Therefore, the most powerful Arcanists in the Nesser Empire often cut off the entire mountain and then hung it upside down in the air, making it into a floating city. Duque once thought that after he traveled to this world, he would never find anything like the Mice Energy Core in this life. With the mentality that everything would go smoothly, he didn't care whether the Dalajan could float into the sky like in history. That was until he returned to 10,000 years ago to participate in the ancient war. Thanks to Sargeras's trust, Du participated in the construction of the portal connecting the world of Azeroth as a Void Lord. As the technical director of the Burning Legion at the time, Duque had come into contact with a lot of Titan technology left behind by the Pantheon. For example, the Void battleship's propulsion reactor. Even with the power of the system, Duque could not understand the meaning of the ancient Titan runes on the power furnace. This did not prevent Duque from making a copy of all the data using the system. After returning to Azeroth, Duque built a power furnace just like before, but he found that this thing could not make any ship or even a piece of metal fly. Duque was disappointed for a long time, and secretly asked Ronin, Jaina, and Magna Aegwin to form a team to research. Not long ago, in a secret experiment in the Dalagen, Duque successfully made a small mage tower fly 10 meters above the ground. He finally understood what the problem was. The Titan's propulsion reactor's area of effect was limited to objects that had been strengthened by high-intensity and high-density magic circuits. Ordinary objects that had not been strengthened by magic circuits could not be used. The surface buildings and underground areas of the Dalagen had been strengthened by countless generations of mages in the past 2,800 years, and had long become a true magic creation. In fact, 2 months ago, Duque had already asked Gerben to build a replica of the giant void power furnace engine. It was all for today. Of the 2 largest mage towers in Dalaran, one was dark and lifeless, while the other was radiating a resplendent light. That was the Breaking Dawn Archmage Duque's mage tower. However, the one in charge of this mage tower was one of Duque's acknowledged partners, Radiant Moon Archmage Jaina Proudmoore. Report. The Scourge's floating fortress, Naxxramas, is in range, Gina Goldsword informed Jaina. Do you want to go? Magna smiled. Jaina waved her hand, and her voice came from her Danon as she ordered, Light of the Dalagen, prepare to fire. The so-called Light of the Dalagen was actually the mana of all the mage towers gathered together, and after the magic was synchronized with the 12 largest mage towers, the mana would be poured into a giant magic formation that had been prepared beforehand, and the mana would be shaped and shot out. In theory, as long as it was hit by one shot, even the largest battleship in the Gold World would be reduced to nothing. But that was only in theory, because no one had tried the cannon-level large-scale war magic that Duque spoke of. If they were unlucky, they would be blown into pieces before hitting the enemy, and then be scattered evenly on the ground. That was not a rare thing. Yes, a gnome named Daitra always said that explosions are art. That was the best way to describe it. With Jaina as the leader, the Radiant Moon Archmages spread their senses to every main mana transmission channel in the Dalagen city, nervously monitoring everything. When the display that represented the mana filled up, the channel turned from white to yellow, and then from yellow to orange. All the Kirin Tor counselors present, as well as the Radiant Moon Archmages from the various countries, looked at each other. Those who agree to fire, raise your hands. Jaina said loudly. This was the final vote. If they succeeded, this would be an epic-making scene in the world of Azeroth. If they failed, the consequences would be borne by all the mages. When all the Dalagen had reached a consensus, Jaina ordered in a clear and powerful voice, fire. At the same time, several fingers pressed on several magic rune buttons. 12 purplish-blue light beams over 5 meters wide shot out from the 12 Dalagen Radiant Moon Mage Towers. Like 12 o'clock, they gathered neatly on the tallest and largest Breaking Dawn Mage Tower in the center of the Dalagen. Jaina closed her eyes tightly, using all her strength to control this terrifying power that exceeded her limits. Finally, after 1/18 of a second, she successfully followed the magic circuit that Duque had set up in advance and pushed out the huge amount of mana that had gathered. At this moment, the pitch-black night sky that had originally been pitch-black became as bright as day. The arcane energy looked like a solid substance. When it was ejected, it looked like the entire Sotoril River was rushing forward. In less than 2 seconds, the exaggerated energy cannon covered a distance of 10,000 meters and fiercely stabbed into the wall of the Scourge Army's floating fortress, Naxxramas. Although the magical shield had been activated, this level of shield still seemed weak under the terrifying bombardment of the main cannon. The outer wall of the fortress, which had been processed by who knew how many generations of people, and the outer armor of the fortress that was as hard as diamond, could not even resist for half a second. The defense was immediately declared a failure. Chapter 1225. The third Mage Tower's magic circuit has collapsed due to overload. Number 7-2. We've lost contact with number 11. In Duque's Breaking Dawn Mage Tower, a large number of intermediate mages were in a mess. There were cheers of joy, screams of dutiful commanders, and reports from the indifferent. Jaina frowned a little, because this meant that the quality of the Dalajan Radiant Moon Mage Tower was mixed. Like the earth-shattering main cannon shot just now, it was impossible to fire a second shot in the next few months. Moreover, the entire Dalajan command structure needed to be further adjusted and reorganized. What kind of mess was this? Soon after, her beautiful golden eyebrows relaxed. No matter what, at least the result was good. On the huge magic mirror screen, one could clearly see that after the arcane light cannon shot, the beam pierced through the outer wall of the fortress and reached the inside. The surrounding space was blasted into a mess by the highly concentrated arcane energy, and many places instantly burned. The strange purple-blue arcane fire could be clearly seen from 10 kilometers away. There was an explosion. The tremor was accompanied by a loud rumble that shook the entire Naxxrama's fortress. In the central command room of the fortress, all the liches stood up. The high-level liches floating in the air were of course unharmed, but most of the low-level liches lost their footing and fell to the ground. The scene was very ugly. What's going on? Thuzad was terrified as he pounced towards a crystal ball-like object not far from him. Just now, he felt that he had lost his spiritual connection with several monster leaders. He couldn't believe that this was true. However, when he observed the damaged area through the monitoring crystal ball, anyone could feel that the frost aura lingering around Thuzad's body was many times stronger. He was angry. He was afraid again. In the monitoring world, thick smoke billowed everywhere, and green liquid exploded everywhere. The monsters that had lost their leaders and were incomplete were moving around randomly, even madly biting their companions. With just one attack, the plague area, one of the 4 major areas of Naxxrama's, was almost completely destroyed. The plague messenger Noise, Filthy Hygen, and Lotheb, the 3 leaders, were directly smashed to pieces. At this moment, a female scream attracted Thuzad's attention. The Dalajan main cannon is charging. What? Thuzad looked at the monitor screen in horror. The 12 mage towers that had just stopped began to light up with huge purplish-blue halos. He immediately recognized that it was the glow of high-purity arcana techniques. There's a second shot? Thuzad didn't notice that his voice had changed due to fear. What kind of joke was this? How could such a terrifying thing be fired continuously? With that kind of power, unless it was the Lich King himself, any existence below the level of a demigod would definitely be turned into ashes. Naxxrama's siren was very characteristic of the undead. The wall between the plague area and the spider area is broken. The arcane energy is beginning to spread in the spider district. The cursing disciple's messenger's voice was extremely shrill. Farina was hopping mad. Close the protective wall. Send Bonehead to save the spider eggs. Quick. Thuzad's huge skeletal claw grabbed the Black Witch's shoulder. Shut up. I can't save those damn spider eggs now. In order to prevent the disaster from spreading, the damaged area must be temporarily abandoned. We can't give up. Pa! The Great Lich slapped his disobedient subordinate in the face. Organize a counterattack. Engage in close combat before the Dalajan is done recharging. Use the Great Lich King's power of death to drown this damn Sky City. Thuzad was now more like a gambler who had lost too much. He was betting that the Dalajan didn't have such a huge magic reserve. Betting that the Dalajan couldn't fire the second shot. At this moment, in the Dalajan's command center, the mages saw that Naxxrama's didn't retreat but instead advanced, and they were a little scared. Did our deception plan fail? Gina Goldsword asked, trembling. No, it succeeded. It also failed. Gina rubbed her eyebrows. The so-called recharging just now was actually just following the brocade bag that Duque had left behind. She had a bunch of radiant moon mages put the arcane light on the mage tower and pretend to recharge it. If they could scare Naxxrama's away, that would be the best. Magna, who had turned into a female high elf, put her hands on her hips. It looks like Thuzad wants to kill us all and turn us all into liches. Then he can make up for his losses. The arrogant were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of the reckless. Undead soldiers didn't care about money, and they didn't care about their lives. If left alone, they would definitely increase in numbers. They were worse than hooligans. Every elite in the alliance had to go through 16 years of adulthood, and then a few years or even 10 years of training. Mages were even rarer. This kind of exchange was definitely not what Gina wanted. Moreover, with the data from today's main canon experiment, they could take it back and study it. When everything was ready and the main canon was upgraded to the perfect version, they would definitely have a much higher chance of winning. Magna saw the hesitation on Gina's face. What? Should we retreat? After all, there's still that one. Jaina brushed her brilliant blonde hair back valiantly. How is that possible? If we destroy the South Sea City, Sister Elugia will blame me to death. Now, the Dalajan was above the sea southwest of the South Sea City, just in time to block Naxxramas from the west. If the Dalajan retreated, then the South Sea City would be exposed to the enemy's attack. When Naxxramas flew above the South Sea City, even if a brick fell from the sky, the unlucky ones would still be the soldiers and civilians of the South Sea City. The Dalajan couldn't retreat. Time passed, and when the two fortresses entered within 5,000 meters, the commanders of both sides ordered at the same time, "All magic cannons, prepare to fire." Tension seemed to spread through the nerves of everyone in the central command room at the speed of light. Her facial muscles twitched. Gina swallowed hard, raised a hand and waved down. "Fire!" At the same time, Kel, Thuzad roared the same order. This time, countless huge black beams of light shot from the fortress towards the sky city of the Dalajan. Similarly, the Dalajan responded with colorful light cannons. Obviously, diverse elemental attacks were more difficult to defend against. And the Dalajan desperately put their shadow protection to the extreme to reduce their losses. The magic shield was not omnipotent. It could withstand the largest and lowest concentration of magic attacks, but it could not produce an effective defense against the penetration of a high concentration of magic beams. A large number of shadow cannons pierced through the shield like sharp needles and shot towards the first row of mage towers on the west side of the Dalajan, causing all kinds of explosions. Small black light bubbles quickly appeared and quickly disappeared. The Dalajan commanders could see this scene on the magic screen. Each shadow light bubble was equivalent to the energy waves caused by several steam tanks exploding at the same time, which meant that in this moment, the Dalajan had also lost hundreds of magic professionals. Chapter 12:26. Arranging counterattacks, arranging for evacuation and treatment of the wounded, and even moving the Dalajan city clockwise so that the mage towers that were not engaged with the enemy could withstand the firepower of Naxxramas. In the Dalajan mage tower, Jaina was racking her brains to deal with this fortress war that no one in this world had ever played before. Fortress against fortress. It sounded exciting, but only after experiencing it personally would one know how cruel this battle was. In just 15 minutes of bombardment, Jaina had already heard no less than 10 familiar names appear on the list of casualties. She clenched her fists tightly, trying hard not to let her voice tremble as she gave clear orders. Originally, this position was not hers. Duque could have completely dominated everything. But Duque gave this opportunity to her, and he even said it very nicely, "My journey is the sea of stars. I'll leave the defense of the floating city to you." This was not only a test of control, but also the cruelest test of her magic control. Because many times when the magic circuit of the Dalajan city was destroyed or blocked, she even had to personally go to the battlefield to solve it. Manipulating such a huge amount of mana made Jaina feel that something in her body was getting restless. Or rather, her magic circuit that had been sealed for a long time was yearning for a breakthrough, just as the two sky castles beyond the imagination of mortals were firing at full power, bombarding each other nonstop. A cultist messenger of Naxxramas suddenly exclaimed, "Something's approaching us. It's so fast. Not good. There's something above the clouds in the west." "What is it this time?" Kel, Thuzad screamed. "I don't know. The turbulence in the clouds affects our perception of soul power," another lich replied. "Shut up, I don't want to hear, I don't know. I want a judgment, even if it's wrong." "Kel," Thuzad roared a little hysterically. If I have to say what it looks like, it's a battleship." "What? Battleship?" The kind of battleship on the sea. That lich speculated unreliably, then pointed his sharp white finger bone towards the sky. If Thuzad still had a heart, he would have been scared out of his wits. Just above the clouds far to the west of Naxxramas, accompanied by a thunderous noise, a strange existence that could not be seen was breaking through the clouds like the wind and the waves. From afar, it looked like a pot of boiled porridge, but something was coming out of the porridge. As if an invisible giant hand had pulled open the curtains of the dark room, when the clouds were rolling and spreading to the limit, a huge golden eagle head broke out from the clouds. Just right. The clouds dispersed in a split second, and an incomparably bright moonlight shone on the statue of a golden eagle that was the size of a house. What followed was a huge pointed metal head. Not only Naxxramas, but also the officers in the South Sea who were watching through binoculars could guess what it was. It seems that the men my daughter chooses are always capable of doing things that exceed the limits of our imagination. Duke Barav joked that he was already the queen's daughter. Father. Ilicia was embarrassed. As an old noble, as a knowledgeable old man, as the behind-the-scenes ruler of one of the largest ports in the Alliance, and as the operator of the largest maritime caravan in the Alliance, Duke Barav naturally recognized this thing. It was the bow of a ship. The bow of the ship was so exaggerated that he could estimate that what was about to appear from the clouds must be a giant ship. Tira's battleship could not be compared at all. No, even the former flagship of King Lin could not have such a huge and somewhat vulgar bow. This could only be a super warship, and a super warship in the style of the dwarves. But how could the dwarves have a super warship that could fly in the sky? The only answer was that bastard lover Duque, who ate his daughter clean and did not pay for the ticket after boarding the ship. Well, who asked the Barav family to owe this kid Duke so much? The old Duke was already mentally prepared. Even if he had an illegitimate child, he would accept his fate. His gaze returned to the sky. The giant ship made a loud buzzing sound in the clouds as it broke through the clouds. Below the body of the ship, there were 8 tumbling tornadoes. The clouds that were thousands of meters long were pulled by it, as if they were courtiers welcoming the king on an inspection tour. There was not a single sail or mast on the huge body of the ship. The whole ship was like the most primitive riverboat that only used paddles as its power source. However, under the so-called waterline, there were not paddles, but 8 huge propellers with diameters of at least 10 meters. The gales they stirred up provided the giant warship with a powerful levitation ability that had 4 decks. At the stern, 2 propellers the size of a steam tank provided the giant ship with unimaginable power to move forward and backward. Looking at the terrifying firepower arrangement of 32 cannons on each deck and 128 cannons on one side, Ilicia face-bombed. I finally know what he did with the money I earned. Along with this huge ship, there were 2 smaller frigates that only had 4 propellers and strange sails that appeared in everyone's sight. Although they were the size of a first-level battleship, it was a pity that the first super warship was so huge that it completely overshadowed them. Almost as soon as they arrived, they turned the hull of the ship to form a slope. From afar, it looked like a 3-dimensional cannonball formation. On the flagship, Duque couldn't stop laughing. Ha! Giant warship. Cannons. This is a man's romance. I don't want to stay in that rigid floating city. Yes, you're absolutely right. Cheers to this Skybreaker's first battle. Cheers. Duque suddenly realized that something was wrong. Why the hell are Kudrin, Magni, and Jerbin all drinking and toasting? Who's commanding when you're drunk? I still have you. Magni's, I trust you, look made Duque roll his eyes. Jerbin jumped onto the armrest of Duque's seat and patted Duque's shoulder. We've helped you realize your dream. Now, no one has tried to fight a warship in the air. Sir Commander, go ahead and do it. Duque clenched his teeth and looked at the data in the system. In his field of vision, there was a perfect parabola that extended from Skybreaker to Naxxramas after calculating the wind force and direction. Duque waved his hand, and his voice was transmitted to the entire fleet through magic. Wind direction northeast by east, force 3. 3. All cannoneers, pay attention to the simulated parabola. When it coincides with the white cross, press the ready button. Chapter 1227. In this era, firing a cannon was a skill that required a lot of personal experience. Only Iron Stove Castle, which had more raw materials than they could spend, could afford a group of cannoneers. Iron Stove Castle heard the following dialogue the most. Do you want to have sex tonight? Yes. Let's go to hell. So, it was often two teams of dwarf tank crews who drank a few pounds of wine first, and then, not sleeping in the middle of the night, ran to shoot wolves and rabbits with cannons, causing chaos in the whole of Don Ma Luo. Well, it was a one-night date, no problem. Not to mention that before Duque's transmigration, dwarves still used thick iron cannons without rifling. Even after Duque introduced the shooting elements and rifling and other concepts, the hit rate of the cannons was still impressive. It couldn't be helped. Before there were computers, in the classic naval battles of the First and Second World Wars on Earth, except for shooting dead targets at close range, the hit rate did not exceed 10%. Those with a hit rate of more than 5% were already called godly cannoneers. No matter how accurate they were, they had to first roughly hit 2 shots, then slowly calibrate, judge the position, direction, and speed of the enemy based on experience, then estimate the advance, and finally fire. As for how accurate they could be, only the heavens knew. After all, at a distance of 3,000 meters, even a large object 100 meters long would not look bigger than a finger to the naked eye. Duque's series of inventions subverted all this. First of all, he attached a high-powered telescope to the front of each cannon. Then the image in the telescope was directly magnified on the 32-inch magic mirror display above the cannon door. Finally, just like playing a game, a dotted line was marked on the display. That was the simulated arc of the cannonball after setting the shooting elements. As long as the barrel was adjusted to coincide with the dotted line, then it would basically hit. When Duque's invention came out, it once again changed the entire war. It wasn't that the old cannoneers couldn't do it. With the help of the new system, they shot more accurately and fiercely, but the standard of qualified cannoneers had been easily lowered. New cannoneers only needed to go through 3 months of training to easily hit more than 50% of a fixed target with a diameter of 50 meters at a distance of 2,000 meters. Now, the target was the huge floating fortress Naxxramas, which was measured in units of length and width in units of 1,000 meters. Even from 3,000 meters away, it couldn't be easier. Alright, I'll leave the first shot to you. Magni raised his glass high into the air. Duque pursed his lips, but he still raised his hand high. All fleets, listen up. Fire 3 consecutive shots. Afterwards, the Heaven Destroyer will move in a serpentine fashion, the Black Pearl will rudder fully to the left, the Flying Dutchman will rudder fully to the right, pull the formation apart. As Duque's right hand chopped down fiercely, the entire Heavenbreaker began to fire its cannons from the bow. Bang, 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 bang. At first, it sounded like muffled thunder coming from the horizon, but when the sound of the cannons became like firecrackers, from the bow of the ship to the stern of the ship that was 3 stories high, Duque still felt a little unbearable from the violent tremors that came from the hull of the ship even though they had set up a soundproof spell in advance. This Super Heavenbreaker was clearly many times more powerful than the original version, and it had the typical bulky dwarven style. Every 155mm cannon had rifling, as well as a hydraulic and pneumatic recoil mechanism that was equivalent to Earth's World War II, to reduce the recoil. However, when the 128 cannons opened fire in succession, the powerful recoil still caused the entire Heavenbreaker to shift at least 50 meters to the left in midair. Including the 2 battleships, the 3 giant ships had a total of more than 200 cannons roaring in unison. It was a spectacular scene. Even if the chief high priest of the goddess of the moon, Tyron, had personally activated Starfall, it wouldn't have such a scene. From the perspective of the soldiers and civilians below, as soon as the 3 giant ships charged out of the roiling dark clouds, the sides of the ships suddenly flickered with a blinding light, followed by an incomparably frightening death cry that could be heard clearly even from 10,000 meters away. When the cannonballs filled with the will of destruction crossed a distance of 3,000 meters, They ruthlessly smashed into the outer walls of Naxxramas. Explosions and flames immediately appeared continuously on this fortress that was brimming with the aura of sin. The fortress was on fire, but the fire wasn't too big. But flames were definitely not a good thing for this fortress full of undead. Cultivate was so angry on the spot. What's going on? What's going on? Where did the Alliance get a flying control warship? Could it be that Archimonde, that trash, died on Mount Hyjal and even lost his void warship? The roar of the Great Lich was destined to be meaningless. Duque, while confirming the results of the battle and the point of impact through his binoculars, seemed to mutter to himself, "It seems that Naxxramas really can't stop the cannonballs. As staunch supporters of giant ships and cannons, how could the dwarves' cannons only be 155 millimeters so weak?" Those 155 millimeters rapid-fire cannons were also used for suppressive fire and anti-aircraft purposes. At the same time, they could also test whether Naxxramas' magic protection system was still effective. After all, nowadays, even the great villains had learned to put a cannonball protection spell on the city walls and fortresses. The real killer weapon was, of course, the 3 triple turrets that Duque had installed on the ship. The caliber wasn't much, just a mere 460 millimeters. To the crazy dwarves, they even thought that the caliber was too small. It was just that the craftsmanship wasn't up to standard, and the recoil was too crazy. If they wanted to install it on a flying warship, this was already the limit. It wasn't that they didn't have cannons with a larger caliber, but the problem was that the ship's keel couldn't take it. Magni could only reluctantly agree to install the 460 millimeters triple turrets. When Duque ordered the main cannons to open fire, in just 3 or 4 breaths' time, a deafening roar came from the Heavenbreaker. That was the roar of the main cannons firing at full power. 1, 2, 3, 4. A total of 9 golden beams of light pierced into the dark and evil giant fortress like sharp blades. The hard outer layer of the fortress took most of the damage from the previous bombardment. This time, facing the bombardment of the 460 millimeters giant cannons, the outer layer of the fortress that had been ravaged time and time again finally couldn't take it anymore and exploded. Previously, they were still worried that the Alliance would send troops to land, so Cultivate sent a large number of undead creatures to the outer layer of the fortress. In the end, these undead were all unlucky. Skeleton soldiers, flesh structures, and the like were instantly blown into pieces, flesh flying everywhere. The gargoyles that were just about to attack were easily pierced through by the gravel from the explosion or directly through their bodies. They screamed and howled as they fell from the sky. The huge abominations were blown into rotten tomatoes, and dirty blood rained down. Cultivate had been saving up for many years, preparing to use the undead army to conquer the entire world of Azeroth. In front of the terrifying cannon fire, they painfully and helplessly walked into the abyss of destruction. Duque couldn't stop laughing. Fire the cannons, fire the cannons, fire the cannons. Fire all the cannons. Blast them. Chapter 12:28. The Great Lich King is the sky of this world. He is the land of this world. Everything in this world will eventually return to the embrace of death. Death is your only home. During the time when Naxxramas was wreaking havoc on the land, the power of the cult of the damned once again rose, seducing many people with weak wills into the cult. Seeing the terrifying fortress in the sky that no one could keep in check, many people were in despair. They joined the cult of the damned as lowly people and became the slaves of the Lich King as living people. However, would they regret what they saw today? At this moment, the Dalajan city had already turned almost half a circle clockwise. After removing the illusion in front of him, Cultivate was about to go crazy. This was because, to the north of the sky city of the Dalajan, there was something completely different. More than 3,000 large cannons were arranged according to the slope of the sky city, as dense as a primeval forest. These terrifying steel creations had nothing to do with the magic capital of the Dalajan. This was the most surprising thing. It was only at this moment that Cultivate understood that everything was a trap. First, They used the Dalajan's magic to deceive the Scourge army into turning all their defenses to the magic side. Then, they forcefully broke the shield and switched to downright physical attacks. This series of tricks completely trapped the Scourge army. The dignified Sky City, of course, couldn't just install something as soft as 460mm cannons. Since there was Duque, the commander of the Alliance and the temporary chairman of Kirin Tor, naturally, no one would have the ability to oppose the dwarves' cannons being stationed here. 3,600mm cannons, this was the ultimate answer that the dwarves handed over. This was an upgraded version 7.0 based on the small steel cannon from the second final battle at the Dark Portal. It could be said to have no limits, and the thickness of the barrel alone was more than 1 meter. The entire barrel was 25 meters long, and the total combat weight of the cannon exceeded 100 tons. Because the barrel was too simple and violent, and the size and weight of the shell was too terrifying, there was no way to install a brake. As a result, in order to prevent the ground from collapsing, they had no choice but to install a floating magic circle and a water elemental mount that was similar to a hydraulic device under the base of the cannon. Fire the cannons, blast his mother. For a moment, Thuzad felt that something was wrong. He directly teleported outside the fortress and activated Cannonball Protection, using his Breaking Dawn magic power to deflect most of the cannonballs. Unfortunately, there were just too many of them. The trajectories of the bullets were strange, and they flew in all directions. Some of them fell into the sea on their own, creating a terrifying water column that was more than 10 meters tall. Sometimes, if you blocked it, it would be extremely metaphysically tilted to the side and explode on top of Naxxramas. When a mortar shell weighing more than 4 tons hit Naxxramas, it gave the undead only one feeling: the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Under the fearful gazes of all the undying, the black speck flying out from the Dalajan was rapidly growing in size. It easily blasted through the thick outer walls of the fortress, smashing through the layers made of solid stone. After going through more than 10 layers, it let out an unstoppable explosion. In every room, in every hall, the undead creatures on the floor slid down as the floor collapsed. The unlucky ones on the lower floors fell directly into the sea. The entire fortress shook violently. Black Witch Farina, who had been trying hard to maintain her noble and elegant temperament, screamed as she was thrown out by the violent impact. Although her magic shield protected her well, the powerful impact still made her dizzy. Just as she tried to stand up, she was affected by a new round of impact. Just an inch away from hitting her forehead on the wall. Ouch! She flailed her arms and legs, trying to grab something. In the end, she grabbed a broken skeletal arm that belonged to some low-level Lich. She screamed and threw the arm away in disgust. In the fortress, almost everyone was trying to grab the nearest fixed object that they could reach, but this was of no help to the situation of the fortress. There were buildings and rooms that were completely torn apart after the explosions. The bricks that were covered in magic imprints, the rotten wooden boards, the beams that were engraved with evil runes, and the meaningless dust all collapsed at the same time, turning into mud and debris that fell into the sea. Everyone could see that if this continued, the greatest floating fortress of the Calamity Army would soon become a pile of ruins and fall on the shore of the endless ocean. Saffron! Thuzad couldn't take it anymore. He summoned his strongest fighter, the frost dragon Saffron, who had been a powerful blue dragon in life. He needed a vanguard to open the way for Naxxramas to hit the Dalajan. The huge frost dragon flew out with dozens of its minions and hundreds of gargoyles. However, they didn't fly far before they met their opponent. "Hey, Mount, it's time to work." Duque sent a magic message. "You call me Oni when you're happy." The Black Dragon Princess complained in the secret channel. Duque's face was a little dark. "Stop talking nonsense and get to work." Got it. Got it? With Onyxia in the lead, more than a dozen Alliance powerhouses rode pure-blooded Firehawks, along with more than 3,000 Griffin Knights and Dragonhawk Knights, swooping down from the clouds and fighting with Saffron and the Scourge army. The Scourge army was stunned. Thuzad could see clearly that the Alliance had almost calculated all the responses of the Scourge army. If this continued, Naxxramas could only walk on the road of destruction. No, it shouldn't be like this. The Great Lich finally panicked. As Naxxramas got closer to the Dalajan, the terrifying giant mortars became more and more accurate. The hit rate of that thing 3 kilometers away was terrible, but the closer it was, the more terrifying it was. Sir, the military area has been severely damaged. Instructor Resuvius and his Death Knight apprentices have fallen into the sea. The structure area has been destroyed. Grobulus has been destroyed. Sir, please instruct. In the spiritual connection circuit of the dead, there were cries of despair everywhere. In the sky, the roars of the dwarves and the war songs of the blood elves echoed everywhere. These former high elves did not forget what the undead scourge had done in the Long Song Forest and Silvermoon City. Under the leadership of the Ranger General Sasha, they sang the war songs that had been widely spread when the Troll Empire was still wreaking havoc in the Lordaeron continent. Dragon hawks spread their wings, bows and arrows raised high, destroy evil, protect our forest. They, or their predecessors, had sung the same war song when they fought alongside the humans 2,800 years ago. 2,800 years later, when this sacred and ancient song was sung, it once again reminded people of that sacred and solemn oath. In the blink of an eye, 3,000 years had passed, and more races had joined the war against evil. Chapter 1229. The sky-breaking plan was to break the rule of evil in the sky. Whether it was humans, elves, or the major races of the Alliance and Horde, none of them had the ability to soar in the sky. Over the past few days, the evil fortress of the undead, Naxxramas, had been harassing them like flies. If they were strong, they would be harassed. If they were weak, they would be destroyed. Which race, which kingdom, which clan did not have a stomach full of anger? The rice in the farmland was once again infected by the plague, the green trees in the forest withered, and even many herbivorous animals like rabbits began to bite people. This hatred had been thoroughly vented on Naxxramas today. Fire! 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 Don't worry about whether or not the cannons will explode. If the cannons don't explode, it means that you are slacking off. Bulang Bronzebeard personally commanded the cannons on the Dalajan city wall. Even in the middle of the night, everyone could see that the evil floating fortress was on the verge of collapse. Retreat! Fized had no choice but to give such an order. If Naxxramas was in perfect condition, of course, it would not be afraid of this level of cannons. The problem was that the first shot of the Dalajan main cannon had already destroyed Naxxramas' strongest magical defense system. More than half of the 36 psychic magic circles that acted as nodes had collapsed. To regroup was not something that could be done in a month or half a season. If they did not retreat, the mobile fortress that the Lich King had given him would be destroyed here. Just a moment ago, Naxxramas was rushing towards the Dalajan, and the Dalajan was slowly retreating, trying to sink the fortress with fierce artillery fire before Naxxramas could rush over. The next moment, everyone found that this extremely large floating fortress had begun to turn. Trying to run? Any commander with a bit of brain realized that Thuzad was going to run. Duque stood up from the commander's seat. Magni! The first goal has been achieved. The rest is up to you. Although Magni was prepared, he was still a little stunned. Must you, the commander of the Alliance, personally take the risk? Duque smiled. There are some things that only I can do. And my woman is trapped. If I don't save her, who will? Duque's words undoubtedly confirmed the gossip he had with Sylvanas and Tyrant. Of course, the dwarves did not care about this at all. Be careful. Kudrin attacked, and Magni and Gerben warned Duque at the same time. Duque smiled. Don't worry, Amir Thuzad can't stop me. Every powerhouse had their own mission. When Magni took over the Heavenbreaker, the entire fleet's combat style changed. Indescribably coquettish. The 3 ships each went their own way. The Flying Dutchman moved in an S shape, the Heavenbreaker relied on its powerful magic defense and extremely thick armor plates to move in a straight 1 shape, and the Black Pearl moved in a 3 shape to harass them. The air fleet pulled away from Naxxramas and only dealt with the air fortress with guerrilla warfare. If the air fleet fought with Naxxramas, Thuzad would definitely take down the Alliance's airships first. Now it was guerrilla warfare, and the Dalajan was still chasing him. Even if he used his withered toes to think, he knew that if Naxxramas went on like this, it would definitely not be able to survive the endless sea. Falling into the sea and being destroyed was the only ending. Thuzad did not want to fall into the sea. It was said that it was the territory of Enzoth, the most troublesome of the ancient gods of Azeroth. Returning to the command center, Thuzad's eyes glowed red. Everyone get ready. We are going to carry out the chilling wind plan. When Thuzad said this name, all his subordinates were stunned. At this moment, Duque used magic to contact Sar. In the magic mirror, the young chief looked a lot older. He was clearly in his early 20s, but Duque saw that there were a few strands of white hair on Sar's temples. I heard from Grom about the success of Blackwing's nest. First of all, thank you for the help you provided to the tribe. This time, we successfully killed the traitor. On behalf of the tribe, I express my highest gratitude to the Alliance. What's the matter now? Sar bowed to Duque. About your request for help from the Alliance is finally willing to send troops? Although Sar tried to suppress his emotions, his eyes were filled with desire. This was not his fault. The insect army that poured out of on Karaj in Silithus was too terrifying. Even if the hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians of the tribe worked together to fight, they were unable to fight against this terrifying insect tide. In addition, Naxxramas had wreaked havoc, sweeping through the main cities of almost every race in the tribe. This further dampened the will of the tribe's people to fight. It was no exaggeration to say that the Alliance was the tribe's only hope. Unfortunately, what Sar saw was Duque shaking his head. Before the Alliance takes care of the Amani trolls and the trolls who believe in the evil god hacker, the Alliance is unable to go on an expedition to Kalimdor. No, even if it's just the Theramore army and the Night Elves, seeing that the tribe has been cooperating with the Alliance in battle since their rebirth. Sar still wanted to play the emotional card. Duque shook his head firmly. Sar's body trembled and his eyes dimmed. Then, is there anything else? If there isn't. At this time, Duque showed a naughty expression. Even if the Alliance doesn't send troops, it doesn't mean that there is no way to solve the problem of Silithus. Sar's expression was very interesting. When he heard what Duque said, his expression became even more interesting. A few minutes later, Naxxramas. Although someone once said that explosions were art, the guy who was treated as a work of art was not having a good time at the moment. There were explosions everywhere, choking smoke filled the eyes, and there was a turbulent flow of magic elements. Be careful of the Alliance's surprise attack. If you find anyone from the Alliance, report immediately. All cursed disciples, take off your hoods and accept inspection. It had to be said that Thuzad was very careful. If anyone was really so daring as to put on the black robe of the cursed sect and take the opportunity to sneak in, then they would definitely die a terrible death. However, no one would pay attention to a low-level lich like Anad. Just like that, Anad, who had appeared out of nowhere, went straight in. From the outer area, he passed through half of the military area. From time to time, he would grab one or two liches to ask for directions, and he arrived at the core of Naxxramas. In the middle of 4 huge pillars carved with the statue of Lich King Arthas, there was a green portal. 2 liches, 4 death knights, and 24 powerful abominations guarded the portal without moving an inch. No matter how chaotic the outside world was, no matter how many undead monsters fled in panic, no monster would be stupid enough to approach this place. This was an absolute forbidden area. Suddenly, they saw Thuzad coming over. Chapter 12:30. Sir, why are you here? The leading lich was very surprised by Thuzad's appearance. In his imagination, a big shot like Thuzad should be sitting in the central core. Why would he come here? Do I need you to ask about my affairs? The red light in Thuzad's eyes flourished, and dense breaking dawn mana undulations filled with a frosty aura surged slightly, almost causing this radiant moon lich's soul to become unstable from the pressure. Yes, yes, yes. The liches and death knights didn't even dare to fart and immediately retreated to the side. Kel, Thuzad floated over. What made them a little puzzled was why Kel, Thuzad seemed to take a few seconds longer to open the portal this time. In the past, he would enter instantly. But the white teleportation light lit up, so there was nothing else for them to do. Kel, Thuzad immediately teleported from Naxxramas to a different space. Strictly speaking, this was not the interior of Naxxramas, but it was still a special space attached to Naxxramas' existence. Everywhere he looked, there was a frosty aura. The huge steps of the palace were covered with icicles, and ordinary people would slip if they were not careful. Of course, for a top lich who floated around all year round, slipping was just a joke. This was the lair of the frost dragon Saffron. Although the blue dragon Saffron had been dead for many years, as a dragon, his habit of guarding his lair had not disappeared. As long as he was here, he was the most reliable guard. It seemed that because of Saffron's attack, Kel, Thuzad had no choice but to rush over. Because next to the dragon's lair, there were two leaders of the alliance sealed and imprisoned by a powerful magic formation, the Queen of Sin Dorii, Sylvanas, and the Night Elf High Priest, Tyrant. These two stunning beauties were still cuddling and hugging each other as if they had just been captured. Two beautiful faces were so close to each other, it was a pity that they were hibernating. Kel, Thuzad quickly dispelled the magic formation made up of more than 100,000 magic runes and went through it. Then, one of his huge claws passed through Elun's milky white moonlight protection without any hindrance, and he placed his other hand on Sylvanas' fair, slender, and well-rounded leg, and started caressing it. Tyrand was the first to wake up. Kel, Thuzad yakshu? She was trembling. She never thought that Kel, Thuzad would be able to break through the goddess defense, but it was so easily broken through. In that case, wouldn't it mean that they would be killed and turned into terrifying banshees of death? The evil will would control them. Even if they could resist Kel, Thuzad's mind control like Uther, they would still be separated from Duque by life and death. For their own race, for their own people, they were not afraid of death. However, Tyrant could not bear to part with Duque forever. This scene almost caused Tyrant to collapse. She knew that here, the power of the moon goddess was extremely thin. 100 units of the power of the moon only filled her body with 1% of it. However, at the most critical moment of her life, Tyrand did not hesitate to chant an incantation and find a way to move her body, which was already weak from hunger, to attack Kel, Thuzad. Rangers and priests were not good at close combat, but liches who were born as mages were even worse. This was Tyrand's last desperate attempt. Just as she was about to stab Kel, Thuzad's head with her dagger, an even more unexpected scene appeared. At the same time, another Kel, Thuzad appeared at the gate that Kel, Thuzad had entered. Ah! Tyrand let out a cry of surprise, and her already slow movements became even slower. Two Kel, Thuzads? What the hell was this? Not only was Tyrand shocked, even Kel, Thuzad at the door was shocked. He also did not expect that there would be an identical version of himself here. Whether it was appearance, aura, or even magic and soul fluctuations, they were all exactly the same. How is this possible? He subconsciously asked, "Who are you?" "Of course I am Kel, Thuzad." With his back facing the door, Kel, Thuzad, who was touching Queen Sylvanas' thigh, flashed to the other side and shamelessly used his other claw to grab Tyrand's Mount Hygel. This action caused Tyrand to let out a cry of surprise. Suddenly, Sylvanas slowly woke up and said, "What are you screaming for? If it's not that perverted Duque, would a lich without that thing touch us like this?" Tyrand was stunned. After the shock, she suddenly realized that this technique was very familiar. And that touch, it was definitely not Bones. In the next moment, the lich who was hugging the two women, who should have been Bones, began to remove his illusion disguise, revealing a dirty Duque. Duque completely ignored Kel, Thuzad, and turned to Queen Sylvanas, asking seriously, "How do you know it's me?" The weak Queen Sylvanas rolled her eyes at Duque. "Who else would come up and touch my leg besides you?" "Good answer. I didn't dote on you in vain." Duque lecherously kissed Queen Sylvanas. At the side, Tyrande was both happy and shocked. She had originally wanted to kiss Duque, but thinking of the strong enemies around, her clear eyes inevitably clouded over. Duque, you shouldn't have come. Then I did. Are you happy? Duque smiled cheekily. I am happy, but, without another word, Duque kissed her back. At this time, Cultivate, who was at the door, could not help but let out a sneer like a night owl. Hee, she's right, you shouldn't have come. I thought this was the day of the Scourge's setback, but in the end, we still won. As long as I kill you, the great Lich King would gain yet another powerful Lich subordinate. And two not bad banshees. Ha! Cultivate's words caused Tyrande to tremble a little. Strangely, Sylvanas was indifferent. Tyrande suddenly realized this and immediately understood. She allowed Duque's big hand to continue doing evil, because it was time for Duque to perform. Sure enough, Duque faced the sky at a 45-degree angle, showing Cultivate his two big nostrils. Then, as expected, he snorted. Fool, do you really think that just because I came to your stronghold, you'll be able to defeat me? You plot against my subordinates and women, and I'm also plotting against you. Perhaps, in terms of undead magic, I'm not as good as you, but in terms of spatial magic, you're not even worthy of carrying my shoes. Chapter 1231. Duque's words immediately reminded Cultivate of something bad. But as soon as he finished speaking, the entire fortress shook violently. Without giving Cultivate a chance to react, the next moment, the entire Naxxramas began to teleport. Outside, when the frost dragon Sapphiron began to withdraw, the Alliance felt that something was wrong. Now that they suddenly saw a huge portal halo covering Naxxramas, the Alliance warriors were in an uproar. Charge! Catch up! Don't let these undead monsters get away! Fire, fire! Where's the Dalajan? What are you doing? Fire another shot at this floating tomb. There were curses everywhere, and the entire Alliance's magic communication network was full of calls to the top to find a way to keep Naxxramas. Everyone was holding their breaths. Now that they had finally formed a siege, and the Alliance had the upper hand, they actually saw a cooked duck about to fly away. Who could bear this? At this moment, 3 signal flares suddenly rose above the Dalajan. They spread out in a circle at a higher altitude, accompanied by a special light effect. It was very beautiful, red, yellow, and blue. This is the retreat signal? Every dwarf griffin knight and elf dragon hawk knight were dumbfounded when they saw this signal. Not only the Dalajan, but on the Skybreaker, the same signal flares rose. It was actually a unanimous order from the Alliance's top brass to retreat. No matter how unwilling they were, since they wore the badge of the Alliance, they were soldiers of the Alliance, and the orders of the Alliance military were absolute. If they disobeyed orders, even their own king could not protect them. On the first day of joining the Alliance army, every soldier was repeatedly told and emphasized this point by their country's generals. The Alliance Air Force reluctantly retreated. Not only the Air Force, but the Dalajan was also in an uproar. A large number of mid-level and high-level mages surrounded the headquarters, demanding an explanation from Jaina. Why did you give up the pursuit? We should have let the Dalajan crash and fight those disgusting undead monsters. Under the turbulence of the crowd, Jaina's voice was almost drowned out. Everyone was talking at once. No, it was simply 3,000 ducks making a fuss. Jaina was getting more and more frustrated and furious. She had wanted to persuade these hot-headed fellows, but these fellows who had forcefully advanced to the Radiant Moon realm had the nerve to point their fingers at her, almost poking her face. Gianna was very unhappy. Wasn't this a slap in the face? This was already trampling on the field, rubbing Gianna's face against the ground. These fellows took advantage of the fact that this was a Dalajan that only looked at magic power levels and ignored her status as a queen, putting themselves in the realm of magic and thinking that they could reason with her as equals. Suddenly he felt indignant. As the disciple and partner of the most powerful wizard, Duke Marcus, Jaina was under a lot of pressure. Especially after Luo Ning became a Breaking Dawn Great Wizard, she felt even more pressure. Although she was younger than Luo Ning, she had already reached the peak of a radiant moon mage in terms of physique, intelligence, experience, and even accumulation. However, she just couldn't cross that final threshold. Luo Ning had been lost in a different dimension, and Duque had become the chairman of the Kirin Tour. No one had any objections. Many Radiant Moon mages were unhappy that Duque had left the Daligen in Jaina's hands. This directly led to the current scene of everyone berating her. Depressing. Accumulating anger. Then, Jaina suddenly thought it through. Without any warning, a powerful aura of ice suddenly blossomed in the Wizard Tower's command center. This aura was so pure, so oppressive. Even if the essence of this power was ice, it was as eye-catching as a lighthouse in the dark. The command center, which had been in chaos just a moment ago, suddenly became deathly silent. For wizards, the difference between each rank was like the difference between heaven and earth. In every era, there were thousands of wizards who were stuck at the threshold of advancing, unable to advance their entire lives. This was especially so for Breaking Dawn. In the Daligen's 2,800 years of history, there had been no Breaking Dawn wizard presiding over half of it. At first, there was Antonidas, then Duque, and then Luo Ning, who had inherited Duque's legacy. They had thought that the Daligen was already lucky enough. Who would have thought that at this seemingly random moment, there would be another Breaking Dawn wizard? Sir Proudmoore, you've become a Breaking Dawn wizard? Great Astromancer Solarian asked cautiously in a soft voice. Yes, that's right. Jaina was in high spirits. She flung her long golden hair, looking very confident. How did you advance? It's nothing. I suddenly thought it through and advanced. Jaina said it lightly. In fact, the most important thing was that Duque had let her take charge of the Daligen's main magic cannon. While she was controlling the terrifying magic cannon, she gained unimaginable experience in terms of understanding and manipulation of magic power. This was the key to her advancement. However, she still felt a little regretful. This was because she had used her understanding of the arcane element on her frost element. She had advanced to Breaking Dawn as an ice wizard, unlike Duque, who had advanced with all his elements. She was single-minded, while Duque was single-minded and all-round. In the future, she would definitely not be able to match up to Duque. Of course, this was enough to make everyone around her jealous. Those who had dared to reprimand Jaina just a moment ago were now as quiet as cicadas in winter. They were afraid that Jaina would remember them and make things difficult for them if they breathed too loudly. A Breaking Dawn wizard. Just thinking about it made them wet their pants. As a queen, she naturally had the aura of a queen. Jaina waved her lily-white hands. As a commander, if you can't even maintain basic calmness, how can you get your subordinates to fight calmly? Will everyone be hot-blooded, then fall into the Calamity Army's trap and die, becoming Arthas slaves? Jaina's words implied that these fellows had no talent. Those fellows who had wanted to gain some popularity would never be able to stay in the Kirin Tor Parliament for the rest of their lives. After scolding her subordinates, Jaina said, "All of this is part of the Alliance's plan. We are going to run to Naxxramas. As for where to go, everyone will know soon enough." In Naxxramas, Kel Thuzad was going crazy. His so-called Cold Wind Plan was the top secret of Naxxramas. If Naxxramas could not hold on, it would activate the power left by His Majesty the Lich King and teleport the entire stronghold to Northrend's Ice-Crowned Fortress through the predetermined space coordinates. But now that the teleportation was over, Duque and the other two had run away. The stronghold had somehow lost its ability to float and began to fall at high speed. Through the magic mirror, Kel Thuzad saw the yellow sand outside. Chapter 1232. After the great Titan creations defeated the ancient gods, the great Protector Rider appointed a group of Anubisaths and Torville to guard the Furnace of Origin in Uldum forever, while he led the rest of his subordinates to the northwest, which was later known as Silithus. This barren area was where the ancient god's sea, Thun prison was located. Lei led his assistants to expand the prison, and in the end, it became the sturdy On Courage Fortress. After completing all of this, the Great Protector ordered the remaining Titan creations to guard this fortress. The Anubisaths were the great Titan creations. After the fall of the Dark Empire, these Titan creations, along with Torville, carried out the Great Protector Rider's order to guard Si Thun's prison forever on Karaj. However, in front of the insect army led by the ancient god General Kishix, the Anubisaths could not escape the fate of being enslaved. As time passed, after the end of the war with the Troll Empire, the descendants of the Akur insect people hid underground. As for the ferocity of the insect swarm deep underground, at this moment, the entire Azeroth had probably forgotten about it. A member of the insect swarm, the Akur insect people, had long spread out in the ancient Karaj fortress. This magnificent fortress was originally the prison where the protectors imprisoned Si Thun. However, in the lifeless sandstone corridor of Karaj, only the insects were sleeping within. Even though Azhara and her Night Elf Empire knew of the existence of this fortress, they could not prevent it from being forgotten in the long river of time. Extending out from the base of this fortress was the vast and desolate Silithus Desert. This was also one of the reasons why there were not many creatures living around Karaj. It was only when the great druid Fandral Staghelm ordered the revival of the land of Silithus that Karaj once again entered the sights of the elves. He sent his brave son, Velastin, and a group of trusted druids to carry out this mission. Because Velastin's exploration in Karaj awakened the insect people, there was the famous First Battle of the Shifting Sands. Similarly, in this battle, this troublemaker fell into an ambush and died along with a group of elite druids. As for Fandral's grief, it was a different matter. In this battle, the three giant dragons All-Egos, Merlinthra, and Karastraz sacrificed their lives to create the Wall of Beetles. Although the Wall of Beetles successfully sealed the Akur insect people, the insect empire was still restless. Until today, this was different from the original history. Originally, it was Ragnaros from the Molten Core and Nefarian from the Blackwing's nest who took turns to fight. Only then were the Alliance and the Horde able to work together and destroy their enemies one by one. In this life, almost all of the major evil factions rose up together, and the Alliance army was trapped in the Eastern Kingdom. Although the Dragon Slumber Shrine wanted to organize the mortals to encircle and annihilate Karaj of Silithus, they were powerless. In order to maintain the front line outside of Azeroth's atmosphere, the Dragon's Rest Temple couldn't deploy too many troops. The dragon breaths of dozens of giant dragons and more than 200 adult dragons were not enough to clear away the overwhelming number of insects, most of which were flying insects. Coupled with the disappearance of the Night Elf High Priestess Tyrant, the Alliance didn't announce that she had been captured. The Night Elf army that the Horde had been hoping for didn't move at all. The result was that the situation in Karaj was getting worse. Alexstrasza, who had just bitten off a Void Lord's head, suddenly received a message. What? He's helping me control Karaj? He finally dealt with Nefarian and is ready to lead the army across the sea? No, the Alliance didn't actually send the army across the sea because they still have to deal with the Amani trolls and Hacker, Krasis said bitterly. Then why did he help me deal with Karaj? The Red Dragon Queen was shocked. If someone else said this to her, she might have already taught him a lesson with her dragon breath. He said he wants you to watch the movie of the year, Fall of Naxxramas. Huh. Alexstrasza excitedly rushed back to the floating fortress outside the atmosphere. This was the great creation left behind by the Titans. Through the magic mirror in the fortress, she saw a scene that left her dumbfounded. It wasn't just her. Everyone who saw this scene was so shocked that their jaws almost dropped to the ground. In the Dalagen, through the magician's eye, Duque had his left arm around Sylvanas' shoulder and his right arm around Tyron's slender waist. All that was left was popcorn and cola. He watched this scene with satisfaction. They had successfully escaped and returned. Even so, Queen Sylvanas felt her heart beating wildly when she thought back to what had just happened. Duque, how did you do it? You disguised yourself as Kel, Thuzad and snuck in, then saved us. Even though she did not want to admit that her lover was so powerful, the proud Queen Sylvanas could not help but look at him with admiration. This made Duque feel very good. Tyron's long fingers seemed to wander around on Duque's chest. Did you forget that this guy disguised himself as a Void Lord in the War of the Ancients? Duque is very good at infiltrating the enemy's territory too. He even took me for himself. Duque felt wronged. Hey, if I didn't help you back then, you would have become the devil's plaything. Yes, yes, yes. When I recover my strength, I will repay you. Tyron replied with a flirtatious look. Actually, Duque's infiltration was not worth a damn. Since he could disguise himself as a Void Lord back then, his control of dark energy was naturally very good. As the Scourge was born from the Burning Legion, the nature of their power was the same. Before Arthas, who was disguised as the Lich King, woke up, nothing could be changed. What happened next was simple. Duque first killed a Lich, then used the dark energy of the Shadow Element, the soul manipulation ability he learned from the Burning Legion, and the true illusion created by the system Elf to fool the bones on the periphery. Next, he used the illusion to disguise himself as Kel Thuzad and used the system to crack the magic defense system that was too shallow for him. If he had to pretend to be a Death Knight, he would most likely be exposed. But pretending to be Kel Thuzad, who was born as a mage, was simply too easy. The only problem was that Duque could not escape the senses of the Frost Dragon, Sapphiron. But after forcing Sapphiron to make a move, everything was solved. As a transmigrator, Duque was very clear about Naxxrama's teleportation ability. Although this would cost Naxxramas a lot of magic, the magic was not his, so what did it have to do with him? Naxxramas would be fine if he did not teleport, but once he did, because someone had secretly changed the spatial coordinates, he was directly sent to Karaj. Chapter 12:33. This day was the day of suffering for the Karaj insect people. What was supposed to be a good hunt turned into a disaster. In the sky above the Karaj temple, an incomparably huge man-made object passed through the void and appeared above the temple. For the insect people, this was not a pleasant thing. Because as soon as this huge sky fortress appeared, the sky was filled with dust, broken tiles, and huge broken pieces of buildings that fell from the sky like rain. When the huge fortress completely appeared in the sky, it almost covered half of the Karaj temple. What made the insect people even more infuriated was the enemy's provocative airborne attack. A large number of undead fell from the sky. As long as they didn't fall into meat paste, even if they only had half of their bodies left, even if they dragged their spines, the zombies would still wildly attack all living things. Their targets naturally included the giant beetles. These strange insects with 4 legs, angular bodies, and mouths like scythes were actually the Vecnus warriors of the Karaj insect people. The Vecnus warriors were quite large. Every insect warrior was the size of a small car that Dubo had used before he transmigrated. Perhaps 100 zombies wouldn't be able to kill a Vecnus warrior, but as long as they surrounded and killed an insect, that insect would quickly turn into a zombie and attack its former companions. This easily angered the insect people's commander. They immediately sent out giant dog-headed guards that were as tall as a 10-story building, the Anubisath Sentinels. In contrast, other large undead creatures began to fall from the sky, such as abominations and the even more exaggerated stitched behemoths. They also angrily attacked the Anubisath warriors. As a result, the battle began to escalate before the leaders of both sides could stop it. In fact, if anyone could control their own soldiers, they would know that this was a misunderstanding. Unfortunately, none of the leaders had the luxury to do so. On Karaj's side, most of the leaders were in deep sleep. On Naxxramas's side, the aftermath of the explosion didn't stop with the teleportation. In other words, it was because of the teleportation that it intensified. This was an incomplete teleportation. No normal teleportation would be so messy. At the moment of teleportation, 2 different coordinates would be used. The result was that the teleportation encountered a terrifying spatial crack. The leader of the construction area, Glass, is severely damaged. Only half of his body is left. He can't fight. The levitation system has failed. We're falling. The voice of the cursing disciple sorcerer who was in charge of making the report reminded the other undying of the screams of a chicken before it was slaughtered. Reboot the system. Kel, Thuzad shouted as he rushed back. There's no response. Something seems to be blocking the soul transmission. Kel, Thuzad personally rushed over and directly invaded the control circuit with his spirit. Almost instantly, he discovered that the originally unimpeded soul control system had been tampered with. In the suspension system, there was a powerful will that was no less powerful than his entangled there. The entire stronghold was falling, but the willpower was too strong for him to forcefully unlock it. He could only try to touch it and see what kind of encryption or puzzle lock it was. Excuse me, what is 1 + 1? In Kel, Thuzad's sea of consciousness, Duque's voice, which he hated to the extreme, sounded frivolous. 2. Kel, Thuzad did not hesitate. If you put 1 and 1 together, it's obviously 11. The will left behind by a certain person was acting shamelessly. Kel, Thuzad didn't give up and tried again. Excuse me, what is 1 + 1? Duque's voice was full of seriousness. 11, Kel, Thuzad answered decisively. Wrong. The first time I asked you, I was teasing you. The second time, didn't you notice that I was using a serious tone? Kel, Thuzad suddenly wanted to kill someone. Again. Excuse me, what is 1 + 1? Kel, Thuzad noticed that Duque's voice was as serious as the second time. So he answered decisively, 2. Correct. Please use Goldbox conjecture to prove it. This time, Kel, Thuzad went berserk. Prove your sister. What is Goldbox conjecture? What the hell is this? You're clearly playing with me? As if to confirm Kel, Thuzad's thoughts, Duque's voice appeared again, full of ridicule. Yes. I'm playing with you, so what? Bite me if you're not convinced? Without any explanation, Duque's will that was left in the control center suddenly launched a terrifying mental attack on Kel, Thuzad. Gathering together, it was a mind blast that went straight into Kel, Thuzad's mind. They were both breaking dawns, so even if there was a difference, it was not necessarily a difference of heaven and earth. Of course, a remnant will could not do anything to Kel, Thuzad. Delaying for time was not a problem. In the real world outside, a group of undyings waited for Kel, Thuzad's instructions. In the end, Kel, Thuzad fell into a strange state of silence. They could only try to save the rapidly falling floating fortress by themselves. At least send out the air force. Open up the gargoyle's attack path. Black Witch Farina screamed. Perhaps what she did was right. However, under the acceleration of gravity, a huge fortress weighing tens of thousands of tons suddenly fell from a height of 1,000 meters. This was no different from throwing a terrifying tactical nuclear bomb equivalent to 10,000 tons of TNT on top of the Courage Temple. The top of the huge temple, which was full of reliefs, was completely torn apart with a sharp roar. The bricks and pillars that had stood tall in the desert of Silithus for who knew how many centuries broke and collapsed one after another. They fell to the ground and were crushed into powder by an even stronger impact. The Courage Temple, the superstructure that had imprisoned the ancient god Thun for more than 25,000 years, turned into ruins in a matter of seconds. The impact stirred up sand and dust, covering the entire sky of Silithus. Amidst the shattered stone shards, there were also countless insect limbs. After an unknown amount of time, the dust that had been stirred up finally settled down. When the dragons and other forces used their telescopic magic to spy on the area, they found that the Courage Temple had disappeared. In its place was only half of Naxxramas. Of course, this was not the end. This was because the core of the Courage Temple was not on the surface at all. Stimulated, countless beetle guards rushed out from every corner of the temple, madly crawling towards the undead fortress that had destroyed their holy land. Similarly, as long as it was an undead creature with a relatively intact body, they mercilessly fought against the incoming beetles. An earth-shaking uproar followed. Whether Kel, Thuzad and Thun were willing or not, they had no choice but to become mortal enemies and had to fight until only one side was left. Chapter 1234. In the Magic Mirror's live broadcast, the Scourge army and the Kiraj insect people were fighting nonstop. Every moment, there were hundreds and thousands of undead or Kiraj insect people being destroyed. If it was somewhere else, Thuzad might have jumped up in joy. With so many corpses, it was enough for him to pull out a terrifying undead army that could sweep across half the continent. Obviously, Thun, who was in the deepest part of the ruins of the Kiraj temple, would not let Thuzad do as he pleased. At first, there were many insects that were killed and resurrected as corpse insects, devouring their own kind. In addition, the fighting style of the insects was to bite one of their legs and bite one of their heads. It was extremely brutal and direct. Basically, insects of the same level would end up dying together. This kind of fighting style was obviously disadvantageous to the Kiraj insect people. However, with a small trick of the ancient god in his half-asleep state, Thuzad suddenly discovered that the canopy of undead, which was usually accurate everywhere, could not be held up in the sky above the Kiraj temple. An even more ancient and evil will forcibly took control of the weather here. This forced Thuzad to let his subordinates engage in the most primitive form of attrition with the insect people. Other than the insects, the Kiraj insect people also had monsters like the Anubisath giants and the obsidian golems. The Scourge army used the fat abominations and various deformed large-sized monsters to fight against them. Whether they were willing or not, the two sides fought until the sky was dark and the moon was dark. Go! Kill it! Why do you have to use your feet to step on it? You can roll over. Don't you think this lich is a joke? Releasing a bug swarm storm on a construct? Take a horse stance and punch it with your left hook and right hook. At the highest level of the Breaking Dawn Mage Tower in the Dalajan, it was very lively. Almost the entire floor echoed with the shouts of a certain Bad Alliance commander, as well as the giggles of seductive women. How lucky! If it wasn't like this, the Night Elf warriors would have to face such a monster with their flesh and blood. My heart aches. Tyrant gently pressed her hand on her sexy collarbone. Duke, you're so bad. Queen Sylvanas rarely showed her tender side. His impression of Queen she had always been extraordinary and valiant. Perhaps it was due to her environment, but in history she carried the fate of the entire kingdom as a ranger general, but she also had to bear the future of the entire Forgotten Ones. In this life, although she was crowned queen, and with Duke's help, the elf situation was much better. But she had to always wear a mask called strength. However, after being captured this time, Sylvanas suddenly realized that he was weak in a certain sense. It turned out that at certain times, there were many things that she couldn't resist or control. In the most desperate moment, she called out Duke's name. Duke did not disappoint her and responded to her call for help. From being ambushed by the Burning Legion, to falling into the enemy's hands, to almost dying, to somehow returning safely. At this moment, Sylvanas still felt as if he was in a dream. Tyrant, on the other hand, was even calmer. This was not the first time she had been captured. She was right next to them, supporting her chin with her hand, perfectly accompanying them. If Duke wanted to play any tricks, she would not reject him either. But Duke did not force them to do anything, understanding that they were still in a state of shock, and only occasionally rubbed their ears against each other. At the start, Duke seemed to have endless desires. Sylvanas's long legs and Tyrant's Mount Hyjal were all places that he would forget to leave. However, after a long time, one would realize that people's passionate love would turn into a kind of attachment that they couldn't bear to part with. It was as if after getting used to each other's existence, they could no longer bear to be apart. It was a strange love mixed with kinship, rich and lasting. Duke, I've advanced. You two aren't together? Jaina rushed in excitedly, but was surprised to find that Duke was just hugging. Duke bared his teeth. All right. Congratulations, Breaking Dawn Great Wizard Jaina. Jaina put her hands on her hips. Hey, my lover and teacher. When are you going to become a demigod? So, as for the requirements to step into the divine realm, Duke already had a vague guess. The three divinities of fire, arcane, and ice were obviously necessary. But now that he had fused with shadow, he needed at least a holy divinity to balance it out. This gave Duque a headache, But now, he had an idea of a frost divinity, Frost Dragon Saffron. Duque had thought that he would get rid of the great Frost Lich, Kel, the Zad. Who knew that his target had changed to Saffron? If that was the case, it would be much more convenient. In case Saffron's divinity was not enough, Duque had another target, Syndagosa, who had saved Arthas in Fellwood Forest. This former queen of the Blue Dragons, and now the mother of the Frost Dragons, was definitely qualified. However, with the entire Ice-Crown Citadel forcibly sealing itself in 10,000 years of ice, Duke had no way of finding trouble with Syndagosa. As for the Holy Divinity, the only one Duque could think of was the Naru of the Outland. Divinity was a very precious thing. If it was the one in Shotrath City, it was not impossible to achieve his goal through negotiation. The only problem was arcane magic. Duke couldn't figure out where he was going to get the divinity of the Arcana system. However, he could only cross the bridge when he came to it. At this moment, seeing Jaina wagging an invisible tail with an expression that said, "Praise me quickly," Duque smiled. "Don't you want a reward? Come, let me give you some pointers on the flow of magic in the ORZ position." Jaina's face instantly turned red. Even though she was hesitating, she still obeyed. Putting aside Duque's nonsense, Duque played hard this time, forcing the Scourge Army and Thun to fight each other, which greatly reduced the pressure on the Alliance and the Horde. The Horde was able to catch their breath. Without the harassment of the flying insects, Thrall was able to successfully complete the work of disaster relief and organizing the troops. This time, Thrall gave a clear answer. If the Alliance can send 100,000 troops, the Horde can send 50,000 warriors to attack on Karaj in Silithus. After the Alliance got rid of Ragnaros and Nefarian, Duque gave the important task of dealing with Hacker to William. He brought a group of people and rushed over to support Aurelia. While Queen Sylvie and Tyrande were resting, Duque went to visit old Mograine. Duque could hardly recognize Mograine. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.